rocking and rolling here. How about that 80s party last night, right? Hey, hey. That was a rocking good time at Delara. Can I get the slide up here of our sponsors? I mean, huge shout out to Kennametal for sponsoring that last night. I thought that was just a great party. So thank you, Kennametal. I also want to give a shout out to Granger and DMG Mori. DMG Mori is our event app sponsor for their support. I mean, without these companies here, this conference does not take place. And more importantly, without these sponsors here, we don't get free booze and some really good food. So huge shout out to these guys, so thank you. So now we've got a riveting presentation on OSHA. These guys are going to make it fun. I mean, Omar, you made that presentation fun yesterday. So now I want to see what you do with OSHA. So Omar and Steve, come on up, and look forward to hearing you guys.
I'm not sure if the challenge is going to be accepted, and there's no Caitlin here to make me more fun. So you're on, bud. You're going to have the lawyer and the lobbyist cracking as many jokes about OSHA as possible at 8:30 in the morning. Bear with us. It's going to be a little bit painful at times,
yes,
but hopefully you'll be able to take something away, news you can use from both Washington and the real world.
Yes, the real world. Really?
Yes, you're from the real world. I'm from a bubble in the Beltway.
Well, obligatory lawyer joke first. What is the difference between a dead lawyer in the road and a dead animal on the road? There's track marks, skid marks in front of the dead animal. So, sorry, I had to lighten it up a little bit. One more thing before we get started. How many of you have ever called me or Tom McCarthy for legal advice? How much did that cost you? Nothing. How many of you know that you can call McMahon Berger as part of your benefits of being an NTMA member? Why aren't you calling? It's free. It's already part of your membership. We really highly recommend that you do that. It's an awesome part of being a member of the NTMA, and we love getting your calls. We love talking to you, and it doesn't cost you a thing. So please take advantage of that and spread it to your members. I went to the Chapter Leadership Summit in New Mexico earlier in January and spread the word and started to get some more calls. So please take advantage of that. It's a very good benefit of being a member. So we're going to talk about OSHA today. You all know Omar. Hopefully you know me. You should get to know me. I'm not that bad of a guy. So let's talk about what we're going to do today is talk about some various topics concerning OSHA. Those are the topics we're going to get into. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to go over in detail the table of contents. So let's get right into it. First one, OSHA worker walk-around proposed rule.
So let me set the stage for you about why some of this is happening, and then we can go into what you should probably be doing about it. The Biden administration obviously, well, not obviously, the president says he's the most pro-union president in the history of the country, and he's trying to do everything possible that he can to do it. I was on a call a couple of weeks ago about this OSHA worker walk-around rule where the intention is to allow a third-party representative of those employees to be able to go and accompany OSHA on an inspection. The goal there is to allow unions to go into non-union shops and start getting a foothold. That's literally exactly what we were told on that call a couple of weeks ago, and that is the intent. The history of this did start in the Obama administration, and in that call that I had in 2015 with OSHA, they actually didn't want it. They don't want somebody often looking over their shoulder. So that tells you this is purely, really driven from that union standpoint, and that there really are some issues that you need to watch out for there.
Yeah, and this is really in the statute itself. It expressly says, and a representative authorized by his employees. Now, typically, in the past, in the old days, that would be if there was already a union present in the facility, right? So if you have an OSHA inspection, the OSHA inspector shows up, and they want to tour your facility, the employee has a right, and the union has a right to accompany you and that OSHA inspector throughout the facility. And we said, sure, you have that right. Are you saying that now if I don't have a union at my facility and the employee wants a union representative, I have to allow it? Yes, that's where this is going. And it's, as Omar said, it's really in the language itself. Whether they have a collective bargaining agreement or not, you have to allow them to do that, which I think is bizarre, but that's what they're going to, that's what they're going to allow. So, I'm sorry? Which union? Whatever they want.
And we've heard it can be as minimum as a single employee could ask for that representative.
Right. A single employee says, I want this. And a lot of times what would happen would be, so say, it wouldn't happen necessarily with you guys, but if you're on a job site where you have a non-union workforce, and there's a union workforce at that job site, and then OSHA comes in, they say, I want that union person who represents the other contractor on that work site. I want them to come around and follow us around. And What does that do? That gives them an entry right into your workforce, and there's not a thing you can do about it. Of course.
Yeah, please.
You don't have a union. OSHA doesn't tell you they're coming. No one knows that they're coming. They show up. How does that even work?
Quite frequently, what happens, the reason OSHA does show up is from an employee phone call. So an employee phone call, or a union could call. A union can be referenced and say, I think there's some issues at that employer over there, and I think you ought to go inspect them. Oh, and by the way, Joe wants me to come along, wants me to be there when they do that. Now, OSHA says, well, we only want people there who have knowledge of this industry or knowledge of these workplace safety issues. Does a union really have that knowledge? Maybe, if you're being very liberal in that, but probably not. Which union? It's what? Oh, no.
Yeah. Right. It comes back to, and there's some others, if you hear us talk about NLRB, it's about expanding the base. I just was listening to one of my podcasts on Marketplace about Chattanooga and VW plant and the UAW history of there. This is about growing the numbers of unions. Right. And that's really what much of this comes down to.
Now, OSHA can reject the request.
Yeah.
They think that, no, they don't have any knowledge of this, it's not, I don't need it. Or it could be like, they show up and they need to go there right away. Like maybe there's a fatality or a bad injury. They don't have time to wait for the unions. They're just going to go on in. So they may just say, no, I don't need them. They're not necessary. But I don't know. I wouldn't rely too much on that. All right. Next one. Go ahead.
All right, OSHA, lockout, tagout. This is something on which we've been working for a number of years. It goes back to about maybe 2009 even, where OSHA's gone back and forth on what to do. There's a few things they're trying to do here, and they've told us they're not going to get rid of the routine exemption, which is doing a tool change, for example. What they're trying to do is deal with uncontrolled hazardous energy. So let's say a machine continues to move. They want to have it fully locked out, tagged out. If you're doing any kind of tool chain, that change out has been some of the considerations that they've had in the past. So that complete de-energization, locking it out, changing it out, then powering it all back up and thinking about all that lost productivity time. This is something that OSHA had been considering in the past. The Kershaw exemption is something that it's been referred to in the past as well, and OSHA has put it off. They were going to put out a rule of updating their lockout tagout procedures this summer in July. They've announced they're going to put it off until August potentially of next year, and we'll see where it goes on that, but it could have significant implications for machine guarding. But most of, I don't know about you, most of what I see from coming from OSHA on lockout tagout seems to be in food processing and some of those other areas, but it's certainly something that OSHA looks for on their list as well.
The other thing that's important about this slide, it talks about cite certain types of instance-by-instance citations. So what that basically means is that when OSHA comes in and looks at your facility and finds a problem, in the past what they may have done is says, okay, you've got 10 lockout tagout violations, so you've got 10 guard violations, whatever they are. We'll just give you one citation. Well, now they can say, you have 10 lockout tagout violations? That's 10 different citations. And what does that mean? Well, potentially, this. So the maximum fine is $15,000 plus change for each violation. Now that's the maximum. Are they going to do that for the first-time violators? Probably not. But the problem is, say you've got a $2,000 assessment for one lockout tagout. Well, if you got 10 of them, 10 times 2, $20,000. So that's what they're looking at. Why? More money, right? More opportunities for inspectors to meet their quotas for the month. So what they're doing here is, I think I can go back. Yeah. So these are the things they're going to be looking at. Again, every violation could result in an assessment or a citation.
And this is a new change, too, so
Right.
That's something to keep in mind. OSHA proactively recently did this, and this isn't something that you might have been accustomed to in the past.
Right, and it used to be only for like the most serious violators, then they would do this for everyone. But now it's, the bar isn't as high. So the lower the violations, they could still do this, make these individual assessments. So again, more fun. Yes, sir?
So regarding specifically lockout tagout procedures around a machine tool, now the advent of collaborative robots that eliminate, or some companies market this, not the one I work for, but some companies market that it's an ease of use and it's a safety product. Who's regulating that? OSHA knows nothing about robotics or how it ties into a machine tool. And if you can send a stranger into our plant to tell us how to automate our machines and then fine us because we're not following whose guidelines?
Good question. Now, before we started this, I didn't tell you, you can't ask me questions I don't know the answer to. Did you not get that memo? No.
So I'll try to answer a little bit of it. There's two parts of OSHA. There's going to be an enforcement side and there's a policy side. And you can actually have a dialogue with the policy people and have them come into shops and learn to understand the process. The challenge is then once an individual starts to get that light bulb moment, getting it down to the regions, getting it down to the individual inspectors, that's really, really difficult. So even when I do have good, positive discussions with some of the regulators that say, okay, I get it, it doesn't really get down there. So you're right. You're going to be dealing with somebody who just does not understand your industry.
And you're risking bringing someone into your plant voluntarily. And that's not always necessarily something you want to do. With that being said, though, of all the agencies I deal with the DOL, the NLRB, the EEOC, I personally have found OSHA at the regional, at the inspector level, to be mostly the most reasonable. Now, you may laugh at that, you may not have that experience, but personally, that's been my experience, is that what's their goal here? Worker safety, right? They want to make sure workers are safe, for the most part. And I'm going to generalize here for a little bit. Some of the other agencies, they have other agendas, but OSHA, their intent here is to make sure workers are safe. So they will work with you, they will help you develop plans, they will help you develop procedures and to determine what is the best way to develop these safety procedures and citations and all these things. So they will work with you. And that's what Omar's referring to. And I think that is something that we can rely upon going forward. Okay.
But in the meantime, watch out.
All right. Whistleblowing. I'll take that one. So under OSHA, if you're an employee and you complain or you raise an issue to your employer about an unsafe work practice, and thereafter that employer takes some action against you, they fire you, they demote you, they transfer you to an unfavorable position, you can file a claim with OSHA saying that you fired me or you took an adverse action against me because I pursued my rights under OSHA. That is obviously unlawful, and you can be reinstated if they find that you violated the law by firing that person in retaliation for bringing that claim. You can get back pay. You can get other damages as well. OSHA is trying to really pump up this portion of their act. They put out memos. They have big sections on their website about how to file a complaint. What are your rights? As an employer, you have to post a notice that says, it's your right to file a claim if you want to. But OSHA is really pushing this, not surprising under the Obama administration, that workers' rights. So keep that in mind. Don't ever take any action. You don't want to know. So if an inspector comes at your door and they knock and they say, yeah, we've received a complaint, we've got an issue with a crane in the back of your property, whatever, who filed it? Who was it? No one ever asks that question. You don't want to know. Now, they may end up telling you, or if the employee is smart, what are they going to do? They're going to tell you. Why? Because then they're protected, right? So keep that in mind. Be very careful. Tread very carefully if that happens. You don't want to know, but if you do know, then you got to really, that's when you call me and say, well, turns out this guy is not coming to work and he's just a really bad performer, so I want to fire him. Oh, that's good. No problem. Let's talk about it. Oh, and by the way, he just filed an OSHA claim yesterday. Well, why didn't you fire him before that, right? We get those calls all the time. So keep that in mind. Okay. Emphasis programs.
Yep, so let's talk about a couple of here with regional emphasis programs, and I'll let you get a little bit more detailed on what exactly they entail. But you've got to focus not just on what OSHA does at the national level, then they also have regional emphasis whereby they could look in certain states and say, here's what we're going to emphasize in your region. And what that means is that they're not giving a directive necessarily to the regulated community, to you. These are directives to the OSHA inspectors of what they want them to emphasize when they're going into a shop. And these can be initiated by regions in addition to some of that are at the national level. So some of you might have seen over recent years at the national level in the last 2 years, OSHA's starting increasingly asking about heat, which we'll talk about. That's because of a national emphasis. In some parts of the country, we've seen them where they do an emphasis on hearing loss. And that's where you're going to see on the noise. Noise issue was a really big deal during the Obama administration. We worked quite a bit. They were looking at engineering controls, a number of mandates that they were talking about back in those efforts. In those days, we haven't seen that national emphasis from the Biden administration as much, but on the regional emphasis programs in some parts, we certainly are.
Speaking of noise, if anyone talked to me last night and said something, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear a word that you said. So I apologize. I wasn't trying to be rude. I just want to talk a little bit more about national emphasis programs or regional emphasis programs. So what these are areas that OSHA is emphasizing in their policy and in their enforcement. And they cover particular hazards that they believe are pose a significant risk of harm to employees. And there are currently, I think there's however many that is, 9 or 10 of them, that are national emphasis programs across the nation. Of course, number 5 there is heat, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But they already have a national emphasis program on heat. They're going to get a little bit more detailed with what we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. So for example, there's one for hazardous machinery, and this applies to you all, of course. And these are the things that they will be looking at when they're deciding who they're going to inspect, what they're going to be looking at when they inspect. And these are the areas that you all need to focus on in making sure that you are compliant with these particular areas. If you're not, then when they show up, they're going to say, okay, I want to see your plan, I want to see how your guards are, I want to see your safety procedures regarding these hazardous machinery to make sure that you are compliant. And this helps them focus their efforts, because it's a big job. And I don't know if you know, but there's not a lot of OSHA inspectors out there. They're desperate for new ones to come aboard. They're short. I mean, all the agencies are short inspectors, or short investigators, or short administrators. So they have all these big plans about implementing all these new procedures and these new standards and everything. The problem is, who's going to enforce them? I mean, right now you get a charge from an administrative agency, and it's 6 to 9 months before you even hear from them for a request for information sometimes, because they're just swamped. Now, OSHA not necessarily, particularly if it's a fatality or an injury, they're going to be there right away, right? Because they prioritize. But with other agencies and even OSHA, they just don't have the manpower, womanpower, to investigate and to fully dedicate themselves to looking into these issues. So yeah, they have big plans, but sometimes on the local level, it's really hard for them to follow through and to take care of things.
On that regional slide that you were just looking at for the noise enforcement, is there any, I think we're all weary of the government at this point weaponizing different aspects of the government. Is there any reason why most of those are red states? I mean, is it weaponization of OSHA against voters that don't vote their way?
Well, this particular one is just for the southern region. So every region comes up with their own. So OSHA has regions, and so the northeast region may have their own priorities. The southeast region may have their own. This particular one, we just had an example of that's why this one was selected.
They didn't pick out those states and say, we're going after these folks.
A few years ago, Illinois region, I believe it was, did that as well. So they'll go one by one. But it's not unusual. EPA will do this, especially if there's a red state that's not really doing what they want. The feds can do an emphasis in certain places because that red state's not coming along. So that's not unheard of, absolutely. But the way you look at it, even just moving forward 2 more slides where we were on the emphasis programs, this list here, you mentioned the word plan. Yeah, exactly, yeah, right where you are. You mentioned the word plan multiple times. So is that really what OSHA asked for? The first thing, let me see your plan, and then let me see your plan for 1, 2, and 3. Is fall protection? Is there hazardous machinery in this facility? Is heat being addressed in your current plan? All of these are essentially a table of contents of what they're going to be asking if it's relevant, whether it's hex chrome, silica, any of those other issues as well. So be cognizant of these as an emphasis program. It's not a full rule, but it is, as you said, giving those inspectors some direction on where they should be looking at times, and think of that as partial list.
That's a good point. And I just had a call from a tool shop in Iowa 2 weeks ago, and they had an inspector show up Monday morning based on an employee complaint. And they took them through the facility, and then 3 days later they called me and says, oh, guess what? OSHA showed up. I said, why didn't you call me when it happened? But that's another conversation. Anyway, that was one of the things they asked. They did their tour. They looked at the area at issue, excuse me, and they talked to a few employees. And then when they left, they asked for a list of information. And one of the things they asked for, what's your general safety plan? Just like, I'll get back to you. So they called me and says, what is this? What do I need to do? And they didn't have a particular plan, a specific plan for their industry. But we were able to cobble together, like they have a safety policy, they had the posters, and we were able to cobble something together and send that to them. So at least we had something to send. But that's exactly right. That's exactly what they'll ask for. Either at the beginning or at the end of their tour of the facility, where's your plans for this particular location or industry?
As you get back to the slides where we were, I'd like him to say one more time now and then at the end, OSHA just showed up, why didn't you call me before? That's the key to it. As they show up, you can wait, pause, call your counsel. Don't just start showing them around the floor and getting your employee representative. Yeah. Call your counsel. That's what you have NTMA for.
Yeah, at the end of the presentation, I've got a little discussion about how to actually do the inspections if you haven't already seen my presentation on that. But yeah, at the beginning of the inspection, they will show up, and unless it's like an emergency and someone's dying or just died or you've had an amputation or something, again, you can work with them and say, hey, look, fine, I'm going to put you in this room, we're going to talk. Let me call my plant manager, also let me get my lawyer on the phone. Well, where is your lawyer? Well, they're in Arizona. Let me get on a flight, they'll be here tomorrow morning. Nah, that's not going to work. But if they're 20 minutes away, 15 minutes away, sometimes they'll work with you and say, hey, yeah, fine, have them come in. I did one a couple months ago. Client was about 45 minutes away. I was getting in the car. They said, you know what? Let's just get on the speakerphone. And the OSHA inspector was there. It wasn't an emergency. And so we got on the speakerphone. The client had a safety manager dedicated to this, and so they were a little bit more experienced, and they felt comfortable with me just being on the speakerphone. It wasn't a really big deal, but we had already talked about what to do, and so they felt comfortable with me not having to come out there. But sometimes it's not a bad idea to call your counsel, and they may wait, especially if you have a relationship with them.
Yeah, we absolutely expect increased OSHA activity. Last year, President Biden indicated his plan was to hire 1,000 additional OSHA inspectors. So this is real, which is why we're taking this much time on a Saturday morning of yours.
Sorry about that.
Just a quick question on the OSHA and the safety plan. Is that something that's going to vary by state, or is there an overall plan that could be provided to NTMA members as a draft?
Sure. I mean, generally, OSHA covers the entire country. Some states have their own OSHA agency, like California has their own, Cal OSHA has their own, but most states just rely on the federal OSHA standards because it's cheaper and they don't have to do their own thing. And there can be a general safety plan, but it needs to be really tailored to your industry. So there could be one just for NTMA industry for the most part, but then you also have to tailor it maybe for your region. What are these regional emphasis plans? Maybe you want to focus on certain areas. But yeah, there can be a plan, but I don't necessarily like templates. I mean, one of the things we're going to talk about with the HEAT plan is OSHA is going to have a template eventually for the HEAT plan, right? Do you want to just cut and paste and put your name in there when it says fill in the blank of company name? I don't know if you want to do that or not. But I certainly recommend having something in place as opposed to nothing, but I think you also want to go that extra step. Maybe not take 40 hours to create it, but as they recommend, but tailor it toward your industry, toward your region, toward your specific facility. Absolutely.
States will,
Can I get a follow-up question to that?
Of course.
We have a safety plan. Should we have or mandate employees to review and sign off that they have seen it?
Absolutely.
Now it's like,
yeah.
all this stuff's unenforceable, doesn't matter. Even if you told them they have to read it and they do something stupid, you're still on, it's on us.
Absolutely. Any employee handbook, what do you do at the end of it?
But we can do that, right? There's no
Sure.
laws that you can't force them to do that.
Well, you can put it in front of them, say, you have to read this. I'm not going to look over your shoulder while you read it, but sure, just like with an employee handbook, you say, you have them sign a document that says, I have received a copy of the safety manual, I acknowledge I understood it and read it, and I agree to abide by it. Name, date, put it in their employee file.
Now, one thing I'll add to that, right back to you, Bonnie, here in a second, is if you're introducing a new process, you also then have to have a hazard identification, which employees might identify, or you might identify, and then you're going to have to do training on that new process that's put in place, and the employee then would have to sign off, potentially, you have to make them sign that there is a new training procedure and that they have, in fact, been trained and made aware of the new hazard or the new machinery there as well. So having them sign when they onboard and thinking you're covered may not cover you in case you are introducing a new process or something like that in your facility.
Yeah, and even in addition to the safety manual, every time you do a training, right, you have the training log, and you put that training log in your training file. And that way you can show, yeah, we trained our entire workforce on October 21st, 2023 on this particular standard or this particular standard. And you can use that information to show we do these things. Absolutely rely upon that.
Bonnie?
That's what I was going to say. Once a year, we have a luncheon for our employees. We spend about 5 hours going over all of the different safety aspects of the company. Now, we're a 24-person shop, so it's not like we can really do that quarterly, but we do it because OSHA walked into our company. They came in unannounced and said, we're just in the area
In your area? Sure. I've been to your area. Random visit to your area. Okay, got it.
What's that? Well, I don't necessarily recommend that. They'll come back with a they can come back with a warrant. Yeah, I mean, again, if you don't have anything to hide and you have a good relationship with them, sometimes it's better just to take your medicine and have them come in, right? Well, that's when you call me and you say, have your little tips to say, okay, I'm not going to let them walk all around, but maybe we'll direct them to this area, we'll direct them to that area. If they're coming in just to do a general inspection, they're usually not going to do that just unannounced. Most of the time when they do a general inspection, they're going to give you a call or they'll give you a letter. But if they're coming in for an employee complaint about a specific issue, you take them to that specific issue and then you lead them out. Now they don't walk with blinders. You know, they don't go like this and go to the direct place. I'm going to try to get them to do that. But you know, if they're walking to the front door and the problem is over there, I'm not going to take them around all the way through there and go like a maze, a mouse through a maze to get over there. What's the shortest distance between 2 points? Straight line. Here's my card.
That's going to be a good billable client.
Yeah, blindfold them.
So, at Pilot, we decided, you know, we worked very hard on our safety program and so forth, so we decided that we would do a voluntary OSHA examination. And they sent 2 different people in for a day each. And they went through the whole plan, made recommendations, thanked us for the opportunity to come through, said that there's no violation, no monetary violation, as long as you resolve these issues, which we did, and they said they wouldn't be back.
Nice. I don't know if you heard that. They voluntarily let OSHA come in and do an inspection. They found a couple issues. They voluntarily abated them, and there was no citation. Yeah.
Is that a state or federal?
Yeah.
We've done that before, but it was a state. From what I've been told, it's only by federal and
Well, the state, so it depends. The states will have an agreement with the federal government to enroll you in their VPP. It's a voluntary protection program. Again, during the Biden administration, Obama, people really pushed that quite a bit. The one caution, if you are a smaller shop, we've heard this, a Tennessee shop came and told us, they try to do the VPP. OSHA came in, said, here's what you need to work on. It was about $1 million. They didn't have that. They were about a 10, 12 person shop. So that's a risk that you might end up
Be
running.
careful what you ask for. You know.
The state of Texas doesn't include the Department of Insurance, OSHCOM, their OSHA. Just went through it about 3 months ago. The OSHA, Texas OSHA guy comes in, walks through, you walk him around, you find spot things that you don't have to fix, but you better fix it or he's gonna make a phone call.
Right.
So we got dinged for no labeling on a ladder. And I said, what? He watched me, I took it, threw it in the trash can, and I said, okay, now, no, I still gotta write you up for that. Okay. So we took a picture and, filled out all the rest of the forms and sent it in.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think OSHA and safety folks in general, the goal is make a safer workplace. And the goal is they will try to work with you for the most part.
One other thing that happened to us, we're open to the public once in a while. We do open houses, inviting customers in. We've had OSHA slide in without us knowing.
Huh.
That's interesting.
Never heard of that one.
And now they didn't announce themselves and they didn't tell
Oh.
anyone why they were there, but they had their eyes open so that they could possibly come back. But you were serving good beer. It was okay. We don't serve alcohol.
Did the tour become really, really short at that point?
We didn't find out until a day later.
Okay.
When we went through the registration list.
Go ahead.
I would file a complaint on that.
Oh, the injury, look, e-filing of your OSHA reports. So this is a new thing. You always had to file some of your e-reports, the summary, but now they're requiring you to e-file your OSHA form, your OSHA logs, e-filing effective January?
Yeah.
January.
Or for your March 2nd filings, Some of you, your company size may not have been affected. If you are now 100 or more, then yes, this does affect you and your shop. Something to keep in mind, why is OSHA doing it? It's because now when they can electronically collect all this information, it's simpler for them to sort through it and look at the NAICS codes and then also the individual companies for target enforcement. And they want to see, are there increased recordables in a certain region based on a certain NAICS, your industry codes and all those, and that's what they'll be able to do. So if you want to go and you can take a look at your 30 or the summary 301As, and you can pull that for the entire country. And I can tell you, when I did my heat comments, we pulled to see the impact. But that's how they're able to it simplifies it as part of their enforcement, and that's what they were doing at least starting a few years ago.
Yeah, it's all about publication of your not private information, but publication of information about your business for members of the public to see. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, but you can properly train somebody, and they can have a back injury and go get ibuprofen, and now that's a recordable without explanation, and now you're looking like a dark, dirty, dangerous industry as the time you're trying to recruit all these workers. And that's the issue. Biden folks want more workers in manufacturing. Biden OSHA makes it a little bit more complicated.
All right, so I'm from St. Louis, and it's getting hot in here. So does anybody get that? That joke killed the other day at an HR conference. So heat roll. I'm going to let Omar take the lead on this one.
All right. Again, we teased this out a little bit yesterday, but let me just start it with OSHA has been talking about doing some kind of an indoor/outdoor heat rule. This is combined. Several states already have one. Oregon, California, Washington, and Minnesota have some version of it. California is going to move forward with including an indoor version of its work rule coming in next year. What OSHA is currently considering is imposing certain requirements on all employers of all sizes if the heat index exceeds 80 degrees Fahrenheit at an initial heat trigger level and possibly at 87 degrees Fahrenheit at the high heat trigger would do additional requirements. Where OSHA is moving on this right now, they started last year. So last summer I was with the Assistant Secretary for OSHA on this and his Undersecretary Deputy talking about the issue. We work for you all, but we also work for die casters. They're melting aluminum, zinc, and other metals at 3,000 degrees. They're not getting their shops to 80 degrees, let alone 89 or even 90 in some parts. And many of these, they just open the garage doors. That's how they cool it through. So now OSHA wants to formalize it. They're under quite a bit of pressure. There were 8 attorneys general from different parts of the Democratic states that sent a letter earlier this year saying they wanted federal OSHA to put out a heat rule by this past summer. There's a lot of pressure out there. Remember my comments earlier? This president wants to demonstrate he's the most pro-worker, pro-union president in history. This also fits within that mold. The NTMA filed comments on October 2nd. The process is as follows. Because this could have a significant impact on small business, the Department of Labor was required to go through a small business review. Initiated on August 25th, it will conclude with a report on October 25th. They received input from small business communities and representatives. We filed our comments talking about the feasibility that we'll talk about here in a minute as well. But OSHA's moving relatively quickly. If they've now concluded that 60-day mandated review, they are now free of that, quote, burden to check the box to small business impact, and they can start moving forward with what we call a proposed rule. If they do move forward with a proposed rule, we are hearing it could be as soon as this winter. So there's a lot of political pressure to have something in place by next Memorial Day, which traditionally would kick off heat season, as you can see. So now we've got the report due, you've seen the timing, but let's take a look at some of those triggers and notice that these are proposals that they've put out for public comment. This is just some things that they're considering and thinking about right now.
So 82 degrees. It's not very hot, is it? I mean, it seems like it would be pretty easy to get to 82 degrees. Someone's in Texas. I mean, they wake up in the morning, it's 95. So, right? So,
Day off.
what's that?
Day off.
Oh, because it's too hot? Yeah. Well, that's a lot of days off in Texas. That's a lot of days off in Florida and those places. So what do? It's up in the air right now. It is. I read through this several times, and what they are proposing is costly and time-consuming. I mean, I talked about 40 hours earlier about developing a plan. So one of the things they're going to require you to do, and we'll just skip to the next one, is do you have a heat plan? Now, a lot of companies may already have a, quote, heat plan, but as Omar were talking earlier, usually that's just the bigger companies, right? They already have these in place. Smaller companies, they may not have these in place. So you have to develop, according to these new standards, a plan. And they say, well, we estimated it would take, if you don't already have one in place, 40 hours just to create the plan. Or you can use our plan that we're going to produce, because when they come up with these new standards, they do usually develop templates for you to use to help the employers with this new processes, whatever it is. Or you can use ours. Again, do you really want to use their plan and just punch in your name? Probably not. You don't want to spend some time. So that's 40 hours just to develop the plan. And that's going to be a boon for a lot of third-party consultants who have these, hey, we've already got a plan, and pay us, give us the money, we'll develop a plan for you, right? That costs money, that costs time. So these plans are going to have a lot of elements. What type of review are you going to do? Are you going to review? You have to review your facilities. Where are the hot spots? Pun intended. Where are you going to have places where it's going to get to that 82 or maybe that high heat 87? Was it 87?
Yeah, they do 87. That's one of the big arguments, the questions that OSHA asked during our panel reviews that we've been on is, do they use ambient or do they use heat index? And that's why you're seeing the differential between the 87 heat index and then the 90 degrees when it gets to the ambient, where many are just saying, why don't you just use the National Weather Service high index alert, and that comes in at about between upper 90s and 103. Nope, that's why they're talking about the science of it. Do we use wet bulb temperature? What alternative? What measurements? Where are you have to measure, by the way, in each workstation. You're not sticking some thermometer in the break room and getting away with it, folks. They want to have continuous measurement, monitoring, and California is looking at 12 months worth of record keeping of that temperature in each different workstation, and you'd have to keep that as well.
Yeah, didn't even talk about record keeping. I mean, you are looking at, and again, that's a good point. You're not looking at the temperature in your most beneficial place. It's near as close as possible to where the employees are working.
Do they see a policy like this potentially driving business out of states where electricity costs a boatload, such as California? Texas is not so bad. So all these people that have to do this, you could have a 100,000 square foot shop, and this is going to end up costing you in excess of a couple $1 million a year in installation and operation.
That's exactly right.
We actually put that in one of my comments that we did for our castings, because he's in California and he's literally said this is going to increase my carbon footprint tremendously if I'm required to increase. Because some of them have tried to do air circulation based on square footage. They do actually have a number of calculation of what it can do, and most of them is going to be about a $700,000 quote if you're a 40, 30-man shop or so, woman shop. But even that didn't significantly reduce the temperature enough in those shops that have tried it even pre-rule, and that's been some of the concerns with it here. Some of these requirements, so as you look at it, every shop that exceeds 10 or more employees would be required to have a health or heat injury and illness prevention program plan. So that's a mandate, 10 or more, so that's the only exemption that they've got. If you're less than 10, you don't have to have a plan, but you still have to comply with everything else that they put forward in there. And that's what you're starting to see. So on that far left column that you're seeing here, these are all covered workplaces where they talk about have a plan in place, training for employees and supervisors, which we'll get to, your emergency responses, your drinking water, which they do have a temperature prescribed as well, the hazard identification and monitoring that continues with their creating a safe work environment that you already have to comply with, and then obviously your record keeping. That's your basic. The blue in the middle is when they get that heat initial trigger, and that initial trigger they're contemplating is that 80 degrees Fahrenheit heat index and 82 ambient. The far right column, that's going to be where you get the high heat trigger at 87 degrees heat index at 90 degrees. And that's where they start looking at different break requirements. For example, if you're at the basic initial trigger of 80 degrees Fahrenheit, they want to mandate, this is not offering employees, they want to mandate a 15-minute break every 2 hours. If you hit the high heat trigger at 87, they want to have a 15-minute break or a 10-minute break rather, if you're doing it on the initial, and then a 15-minute break for the high heat. So if you're running 410s and you're already providing a 15-15-30, start thinking how this might fit in. And then they want to do different onboarding, and we'll talk about those kind of weather acclimatization or heat acclimatization, but you'll see how they increase the different types of requirements based on those heat triggers, irrespective of your company size. It's 10 employees, 8 employees, 800 employees, these requirements would still apply to you.
So we not only have the cost of actually modifying your facility, adding to equipment. If you have high heat source equipment, you're going to have to figure out a way to insulate your employees. I don't even talk about PPE. So some employees have to wear PPE, right? It's darn hot in that stuff, right? So you have to take that into account and see whether or not you're reaching that 80 or 82 degrees temperature, because they get hotter a lot quicker. So what do you do there? Well, you read the comments, you have to provide different types of PPE, maybe cooling PPE, or you get the wet towels around the neck, all this stuff that just adds to it. And that doesn't even talk about the time. Now you have to monitor. Who's going to monitor? You have to have your supervisors monitoring. So supervisors already have all this stuff to do, right? Now they're going to, at 5 minutes every 2 hours, they're going to be walking around. I don't know if they're taking people's temperatures or, because now there's an app, I guess, on your phone where you can walk around and see what the temperature is and all these types of things. Added burden on your supervisory staff. That's going to be in there. Absolutely, it's going to be in there. Because they don't have enough to do already.
Yeah, take a look at the compliance slide, the next one. What they're looking at to put on the supervisors is very significant. So they want your supervisors to be trained to identify heat stress and signs of heat fatigue. And in doing so, then the supervisor is going to need to make the decision, take them off. And again, employee says they're fine, doesn't matter. And remember, those 10 or 15-minute breaks, they have to go to a designated cool area with access to water in that space as well. Some other facilities, some things they've talked about is having fans at individual workstations, having bottles of water in the workstations. Again, if you're molten metal, a drop of water will literally implode the entire facility. That's not going to work. So they're trying to do, in some cases, one size fits all. But that supervisor that potentially has to go around to each station, monitoring that employee and also checking for the temperatures. Now, some you can automate, certainly, and just have different remotes talking to one another on temperature. But if you're going to have to keep tracking this in different facilities, different times of year, weather acclimatization, they really are talking about onboarding. I teased it a little bit yesterday, but they're calling something the 54 rule, 50-4, where you're going to start at 50% on your first work day, then the second day you work up to 60% of your full shift, 70%, 80% until you get them full on board. Others have discussed that if you're in a high heat work environment, a new employee, they work 33% of their shift the first week, 2/3 the second week, so on. You know what OSHA says? Are there other activities or tasks that they can perform during the period that they're getting heat acclimatized? And your answer is no. I hired them as a machinist to work on that machine, not sit in the back office for 2/3 of their time cooling down.
I wish I had my cell phone. I could take a picture of all your faces right now. Like, what? What?
Right, it is. And they're telling you, again, to the point earlier, that it'll take you 40 hours to develop a plan from start to finish. No way. I've literally spent over 100 hours myself pouring through their items, sitting through. They had 6 sessions of 3 hours each in September. That isn't just time of sitting through and listening. I wasn't kidding yesterday when one person, he literally said, I asked my employees where they go on vacation, and that matters in how I onboard them back into the shop. Because we're talking to funeral directors, we're talking to cemetery owners in these things. People are out there. We had one person who works on, they do a lot of electric work and wind turbine stuff. Just, I'm not bringing my people back down. It's more hazardous for them to come up and down on a hot day than it is to be up there where it's a whole lot cooler than it is on the ground. So OSHA really has to try to develop a plan that might accommodate all of these workplaces from ag to construction and to you all. Please.
And what percentage of businesses actually own their facility? So now you're relying on a third party to make sure that you keep your doors open.
Yes. You're right. So the engine, to the point there of how many of you actually have the ability to make some of these changes to that facility as well, even if you have the ability to incur some of the costs that's feasible. And where it comes down into it, you're still the owner, are you not? Or the employer, rather.
Still the employer.
So you've got to meet some of those tests. And engineering controls, PPE, administrative controls, they've talked about changing your shift schedule. I do know some companies that have told me in summer months they start at 5 and end at 2. And so OSHA is trying to get information on that. But even employee communications, what if you're running multiple shifts? If you're running 24 hours, then how do you have that employee communications on procedures for a hot day? Because OSHA says this is a high heat day. You need to now discuss with your workers the precautions and, again, the mandated breaks that they must take. And those are some of the requirements that they're looking at. So some of these compliance numbers are just way, way, way off. Is what we've been told as well.
And to Omar's point, employee communication is huge with this administration. They want to enable employees to be able to communicate to their supervisors and their managers issues that they're having. They want to open that up and make it easy for employees to not necessarily complain, but to be a part of the discussion in terms of fixing things, addressing these issues, being part of the process and being part of the solution as well. So very important in this administration for employee communication.
It is. Record keeping, employee communications. Are there questions also on OSHA Workplace? Please.
But I went through this summer, all of this. We had one rooftop unit go down out of 5, so there was one portion of one little unit that got hot and had an employee complaint, and we had to do the whole plan. They really targeted the illness prevention plan, and we had to do a lot of signage. We had to train every single employee, show them sign. I had to show proof of the repairs of the rooftop unit, the PO for the new unit.
Sorry to hear that, then. Glad to hear it, but sorry to hear it at the same
You
time.
got one right. Did you make sure your water temperature, like I think Omar mentioned this, like the water that you provide your employees, some states say that has to be at a certain temperature. You can't just throw a bottle of water out there. Yeah, I mean, it's that specific sometimes. No.
One clarification. So this is a proposed rule from the federal government. California will finalize its indoor effective for next summer. Minnesota already has had this. Oregon, Washington State have this, but there's also a national emphasis program already in place. So OSHA will come into your shop and ask you, because we've heard this, especially this past summer, do you have a heat plan? So not all of these things are in there, but OSHA still wants and will cite you if you do not have a heat plan, from what I've been told.
And reading through this proposal, it's amazing how many times they say, in this state, they're doing this. We think that's a good idea. In this state, they're doing, I mean, they are copying what the other states who already have these plans, not copying, but being very similar to what they already have.
So there's precedent, especially when it comes to legal challenges later.
I'm sorry?
The OSHA Act.
Sure, absolutely. All those citations that we have to comply with in terms of lockout, tagout, that's all enforceable. And if you don't comply, they can then fine you and cite you. And if you refuse, then they can go to court and enforce it. And if you violate that, you're in contempt of court. Absolutely. There's a timer up here to tell us how much time we have, and it's upside down and backwards. I don't know how smart they think I am. I don't.
You can just turn upside down. It
guess
feels
I'm-
like that's what's coming from
There we
Washington
go. Okay,
anyway.
never
The
mind.
world's
I'm
upside
good.
down.
I'll just talk like this the rest of the time.
Welcome to my world.
All right. Everybody more on the heat issue? Okay, we've scared you enough. A couple more things I want to talk about. One is violence in the workplace. So this is not on the federal level yet, but I think it is coming. So in California, they just have a new law coming in 2024. It's amazing. What, California, right? That's what happens. Starts on the coasts and works its way into the center of the country. So they are basically saying in California, you will have to have a violence in the workplace policy. A lot of you who have already dealt with us, we recommend you put those in your employee handbooks, right? Violence in the workplace, hopefully prevent that from happening. But in California, you will have to have a policy in place. You'll have to have training, recognition, how to de-escalate issues with your supervisors. They even have you provide assistance with restraining orders if you think an employee is stalking you, harassing you, intimidating you, creating an abusive environment. You may have to provide them assistance or help them know where to go for assistance in getting restraining orders. Procedures, evacuation plans, those types of things. You have to have all that in your policy in California starting, I think, in July of 2024. And I can anticipate this coming to other states as well. The federal level, they don't have this. There is a violence in the workplace initiative plan with respect to healthcare facilities because there's so many issues there. But in terms of federal level requiring this for employers, not yet. But I can see, or if they get some time, they would do this. So in the short, make sure you have a violence in the workplace policy and a plan in place. If not, give me a call. I'll help you put one together. How much time we got? A few minutes. Top OSHA citations. I just wanted you to have an idea of what they are looking at. Some of these may not apply to you, but most of them probably do. These are the things they're looking at in terms of when they're coming to your facility. These are the top areas that they're looking at in terms of issuing citations. Lockout, tagout, of course, is on there. Is always on there because it is so important. So keep those in mind when you're going through conducting your yearly, biannual audits of your safety of your facilities to make sure that these areas in particular are up to code. All right, we have a few minutes left. You want to take some questions?
Yeah.
About anything we've talked about? I know you guys have been good about asking questions all along.
I just want to know about CPR and defibrillators and stuff like that. Is there requirements for that? CPR training?
It depends. Lawyer's favorite answer, it depends. It does depend, but I don't think there's actually a requirement that you have people who are trained in CPR and defibrillators. I don't think there's an actual standard on that.
But you might have emergency response plan or a designated individual in the shop that has to have at least, I'm the designated person to call EMS or something like that.
Right.
I think I've seen that in the past in some places.
Good question. Anything else?
I think we're...
Yes. Well, I can't give her my card because I only represent employers. But she would definitely need, obviously, workers' comp should be involved, right? If it's a workers' comp claim, that would be the first step to making sure that she protects her rights and her benefits under the state law. But I always hate to do this, but I mean, she should contact an attorney if she feels that she's been treated wrongfully. Absolutely. That's a terrible thing to happen, even though it's your competitor. It's awful, and that's why we're here. Safety. Safety is the number one thing. If someone was telling her to do something that was not in compliance with the company's safety policies, that's what needs to be addressed probably more than anything. Training, and we didn't even talk in the heat rule about training. I mean, training was going to be, the estimates were 4 hours to get ready for the training and then 1 hour to make the training. Well, for the supervisor, it was 8 hours to get ready for the training and 2 hours of training. So, I mean, maybe in that case, maybe we need to have a discussion with the supervisor who was pushing that person a little too hard. But that's terrible. I'm sorry to hear that.
Omar, a couple years ago, you told us with this OSHA and having this union representative go along, you can eliminate that by having your employees vote in a representative, safety representative. We did that in our company 6 months ago. We were audited by OSHA, but they didn't bring anybody in. And fortunately, we didn't have any discoveries from the facility. But is that still a good idea?
I think it's a good idea. I don't think it forecloses or precludes them from still someone else saying, I want UAW safety representative to come along. I don't think that precludes it, but it certainly would help.
The employees have their representative.
Right.
And
And it's voted, we vote by the employees and we record all the votes. So
I think that would go a long way to OSHA saying, you've already got someone.
exactly.
You've
And that's
already
where
got
OSHA can say, no, I don't need that person, or no, I do not accept that representative because that was duplicative of the individual that you've already assigned to represent.
That's a great idea.
Good protection. Yeah.
Good idea.
I'm glad I thought of it and forgot about it.
Anything else? A couple more minutes of free question. Yes?
When you were talking about the lockout, tag out, that's early stage, but could it get as granular in our business as a machine where you have to power it off, lockout, tag out the machine while you're putting tools into
Yeah,
it?
that's literally what they're talking about. Wow. Shutting it down. Yeah. Get your 5 to turn in a certain way and then change it out. But no, that's what they're literally talking about. Good, unplug it.
And we all know why it's so important, right? And from their perspective, I mean, I had a case 7 years ago where the maintenance guy did not lock out, tag out. He put his head in the machine, and the machine was as long as this room, and the person at the other end didn't know it, turned it on. He's no longer with us. So that's what they rely upon to support their aggressive stance on some of these standards.
That's why you've got to be prepared when OSHA shows up.
Right.
You've got a list of things coming up next to always have on your radar screen and preempt it. Don't be caught by surprise.
Yeah, so we don't have time to go through the rest of this, but I just want you to know, what's the most important thing you can do is be prepared. If they call or they show up, you're too late, right? So have your plan in place, do your annual audits, contact your attorney if they call, have a person designated as your safety representative. It doesn't have to be a, quote, safety manager, but have someone who, like when OSHA shows up and the receptionist says, who are you? I'm with OSHA. She says she knows to call, or he knows to call the plant manager. If you don't have a safety manager, call the HR manager, call the president, whoever it is. Have that person designated in advance, right? So that they know what to do. When they walk in the door, you say, oh yeah, I'll take you right there. No, don't do that. Sit them in a conference room, talk to them, go over what they want to do. They'll have an agenda, right? They'll have a specific list of what they want to say, who they want to talk to. You can kind of direct them a little bit. Like I said, take them to the shortest distance between 2 points, a straight line. But if you're prepared in advance, you've got your lockout, tagout procedures, you've got your posters up, you've got your policies in place, your safety data sheets ready to go. For the most part, you're going to be fine. But at least you'll be prepared. And I can give you these materials and send these to you later on.
I see everything on your bullet list except the last one, employee ownership. How does that fit into?
Well, OSHA likes employees to be a part of the process. Safety committees, you had a thing over there where the employees were voted in. So have safety committees where employees say, this is what's really the safe way to operate this machine, and have that be part of the conversation. So if an employee says, I made this machine safer, I made this process safer, then they'll want to be part of the discussion and make it safer for everybody.
Okay, so employee involvement, not
Yeah.
giving some of your company.
Correct.
Thank you.
You can do that. You can get an ESOP at your place. No, that's what I'm talking about. All right, thank you very much.
Appreciate it, everybody.
Appreciate it, everybody.
Omar, great job. Great work.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great job, man. Yeah, good to see you. All right, we're going to roll right to the next presentation. But before we do that, I know you've been sitting, so everyone stand up real quick. We're just going to move around just a little bit. So stand up, because we're going to roll right to this next presentation. So stand up real quick for me. Go ahead and just twist side to side. Let's just get some twisting action going on here. Let's bend over, reach over, maybe touch those toes, just move. All right, now I want, while you're standing, let's give a big round of applause for Andy Sauer. He's going to come and talk to us about cybersecurity. Now, before Andy gets started, I had 2 conversations yesterday with people that had cybersecurity issues. One guy I was talking to says plant was shut down this week because of cybersecurity attack. The second guy I was talking to said just last week his plant got shut down. I'm like, holy cow, this is relevant. So Andy, you've got a crowd that this is highly, highly, highly relevant to. Feel free to sit back down, and Andy, take us away.
Cool, I'm on. I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that. I thought I'd be the doom and gloom guy today, but leave it to OSHA and the lawyers, I guess. Do the lawyers leave the room? Are they still here? I have another lawyer joke, maybe this one while they're not here. What do you call a busload of lawyers going over a cliff? A good start. Is there a clicker? Do I have something to move the slides? This thing? This is a big clicker. All right, I'm going to try not to make this boring. It's Saturday. I know you guys had a party last night. I can sense the energy levels a little. Maybe we went kind of hard last night. I like to stand up back there. My intention's not to make this the same old boring cybersecurity thing, but it is very relevant to what's going on in the manufacturing world. We'll talk a bit about why. Real quick background on me. My current role is I'm the CISO and founder with a company called Sentinel Blue. I act as a cybersecurity advisor and guide. I have had a career spent in small and medium business. The last 5 years I've been very focused on defense industry, and I'm currently supporting multiple manufacturers and machine shops focused in that defense space. I feel a lot of empathy for the situation that my clients in the manufacturing space face, and now that I've sat through a talk about what's going on in the OSHA world, that empathy grows and grows. The amount of things you guys have to track, the compliance, what's going on in my world in cybersecurity and the compliance that's headed your way, I don't envy it. And as I say with one of my clients, when it comes down to it, we just want to make parts. Like, can we just make parts? What is all this other stuff we have to deal with? Like I mentioned, I'm a founder at Sentinel Blue. Sentinel Blue does managed security services. At the end of the day, I'm just a guy. I'm going to share some of my opinions, some of my experience. Take it with a grain of salt. There's a lot of opinions out there. My goal, I want to give you some practical, approachable advice today. I'm not going to try to, do the same old, same old. I want to give you something that when you leave today, it's like, okay, here's some ideas. Here's something I can take back to my team. There's a lot of noise in the cybersecurity space. I know you guys are the target of a lot of noise. There's a lot of advertising. Folks want you to sign up for their startup service. A lot of influencers want you to follow them, subscribe, get on their podcast, etc. Lots being said without much being said. And my goal is to give you a little bit more substance. So we have a problem in cybersecurity. And it was just mentioned that someone here had a story, but who here has had a cybersecurity incident at their facility? Anybody know a business that's had to shut down over a cybersecurity incident? Like close their doors forever? No one's had that happen? I've had that happen, or I've seen that happen. It can get pretty serious. I love this quote to sort of set the context around cybersecurity. It takes 20 years to build a business, to build a reputation, and in a few minutes of a cyber incident, that can ruin it. Especially in the supply chain, you become an unreliable supplier over one incident. People don't trust you anymore, your primes don't trust you anymore, Everyone's going to be up your butt, including the government. Just a few minutes can undo a lot of work. This comes from a paper that the National Center on Manufacturing Sciences released fairly recently. The statistics they're pulling don't come from them directly, it comes from Statista. And I don't have a great background on what this, like what the quality level of this was. This came out of an NCMS paper. I think it's mildly biased. It is NCMS. But the point of the graph here is to demonstrate that manufacturing, which is where you are, faces the highest distribution of cyber attacks across worldwide industries in 2022, a trend we expect to continue, especially as more and more pressure and more interest in manufacturing and emerging technologies continues. I'll preface it by saying cybersecurity is a business problem. It's not a technical one. Typically, it's the technical people who are going to communicate this stuff, and it's been a technical topic. But to me, it's like finance, it's like HR, it's like sales, it's operations. It's an area that business leaders need to learn and manage. In 2023, it's not something that can be delegated out or something that you can take out of your mind. It is something that you have to have some mastery in. The solutions will also often be technical, but these obviously are problems that impact the whole business. The threat we're facing: daily incidents of ransomware crushes businesses. These events can and have closed doors permanently. Of the people that have been involved in an incident or heard one, was it ransomware? It's almost always ransomware, especially in the manufacturing segment. There's a couple reasons why that is, but that's one of the most prevalent ones. There is also an increase in global temperature for conflict. I mean, when I started putting this talk together, there was only one major conflict we were all thinking about. Now there's two. As these conflicts break out, there's going to be increased pressure from our adversaries and their interest in impacting the U.S. industrial base, which we're a part of. You don't have to be, cutting pieces that go on the F-35 to be of interest to our adversaries. There's also an adversarial interest in intellectual property and emerging technology that's manufactured in the U.S. That's a threat we face. Manufacturing in general, in my experience, certainly with my clients, we're already operating on very thin margins, and based on the OSHA talk, I think those margins are going to get even slimmer. In particular, this is an industry that struggles to keep pace with what's going on in the cybersecurity world and the IT world. When you're operating in slim margins, not a lot of spare money to throw at pricey security consultants to get things moving. So we have some challenges. The threat's real. Responding to it's not easy. Cybersecurity capabilities are growing exponentially fast. The rate of change is hard to manage. It's my full-time job. I have a full-time team of security people whose jobs is to keep pace, and we struggle. Cybersecurity is also largely seen as an overhead and a cost center. The goal is to minimize the spend, achieve the minimally viable result, which is not the right mindset when it comes to cybersecurity. I understand where it comes from, but minimally viable is not good enough. Defenders have to be right 1,000 times a day. Of course, attackers only once. If they get through the one time, that's the ransomware, that's the big hit, and that's the problem. Paradigms change quickly. Every 3 to 5 years, something comes out and flips technology on its head. AI is going to be the next big thing. Before a full life cycle of systems can complete, we're looking at a new way to do things. How many manufacturers can move this quickly and adopt new technology on that kind of a cycle? Not many. And then practitioners in cybersecurity suck. I'm just going to say that. Highly technical, socially challenged. Not a lot they can communicate effectively to business leaders to make them care, right? They come in, and I've seen this in a boardroom. I've seen someone brief a boardroom of 4-star, 3-star generals and be like, the sky's falling and cyber this, cyber that, IPs, TCP, IP, this, that, and they're like, what are you talking about? Don't let that guy come back in here, was actually what was said after that person left the room. And that was my introduction to briefing a room of generals, because I picked up the job after that guy got fired. And I was like, okay, so I need to figure out a better way to do this, or I'm not going to last very long. Manufacturing in particular, like I mentioned, there's a high rate of change. It's difficult to adopt in a manufacturing environment. I also work with a lot of software startups, and they can turn on a dime. They don't have capital expenditures. They don't have equipment. They have a couple computers and some cloud services they use, and if I come in and say, hey, let's revolutionize this thing, they're like, cool, next week, done. It's a way different environment compared to manufacturing. Operational technology, what we call OT, because now it's IT, information technology, and operations technology. IT is poorly understood and poorly protected. That's things like the Internet of Things, this concept where now all of the equipment's going to have sensors that are all going to be on the internet, so they can all feed back to the manufacturer and to you and to your systems. These are opening lots of vulnerabilities that are exploitable. There's a low tolerance for pain, at least in my experience with manufacturing. And by pain, I mean when you adopt security, your security guy turns on some new tool, he's going to block some critical functionality you have on your computer, and the part's not going to get out today. And that's not acceptable because that's holding up sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's a very low tolerance for pain in a time when we need a lot of change that induces that pain, puts you guys in a really tough spot. And in manufacturing, I have found this, and I don't mean this to be offensive. The workforce in manufacturing is not as tech savvy as, say, the peers in the software startup environments that I operate in. So change tolerance is even lower in this population. I have a case study for you. This is a real one. I know all the facts because I was involved in it. I did not work at this company. I was brought in as a result of what happened. But a medium-sized defense contractor, probably more on the small side, depending on whose definition you follow in terms of size. Engineers and manufacturers of major parts that go on military vehicles. Of course, I can't name them. I'm under NDA. But you get the sense. They had a pretty well-funded IT team. They had a pretty experienced IT team. But they suffered extreme lag in adopting change. Due to service delivery concerns, like I mentioned. They can't turn very quickly. They couldn't pivot, adopt new things, change how they were approaching their IT architecture because they had parts to get out the door, man. In mid-2020, one of their IT administrators had their account compromised. And on a Friday evening, going into a holiday weekend, when I was on my way to the beach the next morning, some attackers dropped ransomware in the entire environment. It turns out the attackers were there for many weeks and planned all this out. Figured everyone's going home for the weekend, we'll kick our attack off. Everyone wakes up Saturday morning, all the servers are down, in all the locations across the US, everything connected, no one can get into anything. Emails down, phones are down, pandemonium. 2 weeks of major downtime, and when I say major, I mean they were out. Couldn't get anything done. Months of restoration work. They paid $250,000 in a ransom in Bitcoin, which a few weeks later was actually worth $1 million. So if the attackers held on to it, they made a boatload of money. Outsourced response teams, cleanup work, pricey consultants that they had to call in Saturday morning who were on their way to the beach like me. I still owe my wife for letting me kind of work that because I kind of ruined a beach trip when I was on phone calls the whole time. Total cost to them was in excess, by estimation of $500,000 without accounting for the opportunity cost and the lost time. That was just purely the cost of the ransom, the restoration work, and the consultants on the IT side. So imagine what that really cost them. My question, rhetorically, I don't need hands, but whose business can survive a loss of major systems for 2 weeks? I mean, you're going to have to go back to paper for a little bit. Yeah, you can get some parts out the door, but this is crushing. Can you lose $500,000 or more? Can you tolerate that much interruption and distraction? I know with my manufacturing clients, man, some days it's like we do one thing to slow them down, and they've got phone calls from their prime or the government saying this thing was supposed to be prioritized. You're supposed to have that out the door today. There are no excuses from that. In this case study, we found out a couple things. We found out that the administrator was compromised by phishing. Everyone's heard of phishing by now. This is the #1 threat, and we've been beating you over the head with it with terrible video-based training or slide-based training for the last decade. We're not getting a lot better at it, largely because we've been beating you over the head with boring, terrible video training that you just kind of click through. I get it. They had poor access control. They didn't have multi-factor authentication on one of the portals for their business, which allowed a single password compromise to let someone in. They didn't do any security monitoring. Now, mind you, this was a company that was well-staffed. They had IT people. It was like a 10 to team of about 10 full-time IT personnel. Nobody involved in security monitoring, so nobody saw the weeks of attackers in the network after hours, because they're most likely Russian, performing recon. Nobody caught it. No system hardening was in place. They did nothing to make sure that the systems on their network were protected. So the attacker moved laterally very easy. Once they got in on one computer, they used the network to move to the next one and the next one. And what they did over weeks is they staged this whole attack, dropped code on all these servers across the United States and all their different locations, scoped it all out, figured out where their backups were, staged an attack on their backups, and scheduled it so they knew, okay, we see the most activity on the network between business hours. We don't see a lot on the weekend, so we know we kick this thing off Friday night, it's going to be pandemonium, and they'll pay our ransom. They didn't have an incident response plan, so their initial response was pretty ad hoc. It was disorganized. It involved calling me, someone who was not involved with them much at all. They just knew I had a security background. And a bunch of other people, they just called everyone they knew and were like, hey, we're under attack, we need some help. They didn't have a lot of organization around inventory. They didn't have visibility over their IT environment, so it cost them a significant amount of time in responding. And of course, they made some really poor architecture choices due to having nobody around on staff or even in consulting roles for broad cybersecurity management. I put this in and I figured some people were going to roll their eyes when they saw this, because like, oh no, he's not going to do this. Like, we're not going to get super silly about what cybersecurity is. I just think it's a useful sort of context to get into. I'll start with what it isn't. This is not an exclusively technical concept to be managed by your IT department. It is not a list of settings that you put on the server to turn the toggles on and off and make the network do this and that. That's an aspect of it, but that's not what it is. It is not complex and esoteric that only cybersecurity experts can learn. It's not so wildly expensive, and it's not an outcome that's unachievable as a result of that. And it's certainly not easily solved by purchasing whatever hot product anyone's DMing you on LinkedIn about today, saying, hey, you buy this thing, we got it all sorted out, zero trust, this, that, we're using AI, we got it. It's none of those things. What it is, it's a discipline. It addresses risk associated with technology use. That's what it is at the base. Just a way of looking at technology now, which drives 100% of businesses in the US, I would wager, maybe 99.999, something like that. We're deeply integrated with technology now, and we need a way to address that risk. Cybersecurity is that discipline. I also say it's a journey, it's not an outcome. You don't achieve being secure. It's not a thing. Even though you can achieve compliance with certain things, this is all in flux. It's a journey. It's not a destination you can reach. It's a process that you're involved in. You're constantly securing. Every day we're reacting to new things. There is no end state here. It's a lens for leadership to look through. And I came to the term lens because it's a way that I think leaders, boardrooms, executives, business owners, stakeholders need to look at the operations of their business. Same way you look at it with the financial lens when you're looking at budgeting and what we're capable of taking on, what work we can do, what our capacity is. It's just another way you need to consider what's getting done at your organization. It is a critical facet of the modern world. It is not going away. It is not something we can continue to sort of put out of sight, out of mind, and it is not something that you should delay in learning about. There are no shortcuts. There's no panacea. There's no single investment. You simply have to do it. And hopefully Nike doesn't be upset that I said do it. So we're going to do a quick 101, and that's largely what I'm going to give you today. So I want to boil this down to some easy stuff. This right here is all you need to know about cybersecurity. These 5 steps. It's called the NIST, National Institutes of Science and Technology. The NIST cybersecurity framework. It's 5 steps, explains all the concepts of cybersecurity that you need to know in a business leadership or operations leadership type role. It's 5 simple steps. You start by identifying things. You protect those things. You detect bad things happening to those things. You respond to those bad things, and you recover back to your normal state. It's a simple cycle. And that's just going to restate what I already said. Am I moving too quick? Are we tracking? Cool. Is this all repeat for everyone, or is everyone kind of like, okay, this is useful. I don't know a whole lot about the audience here, so I was like, all right, let me come in with something sort of useful. Is this good? Cool. All right. It's Saturday morning. That's a good point. I'm up here moving around so I don't get too sleepy myself. All right, so the first step in this process is identifying. It's the first and it's the most important step, and it's the one I see poorly done all the time, and it's the one that opens you up to all the problems down the line. So people don't figure out what it is they even have to protect. The action here and what you should take back to your teams is we need to catalog everything. We need to look and document all of our systems. We need to think about where our data is. We need to think about what devices we have on our networks or out there in home offices, whether it's company computers, machining things on the shop floor, IoT devices, stuff like that. And you think about people, critical roles people play. And suppliers is another big one, certainly in the manufacturing space. You need to understand all these critical pieces that support your mission that would be problematic for you to lose or to be degraded in some way. Questions to ask yourself: do you know where all of your critical data is? Do you know who all of your critical suppliers are? Do you know which systems support your operations? And I like to remind folks, think outside the box a little bit. Think of the less direct things that are part of your service delivery. What happens if your system that does payroll goes down? Are you ready for that? Are you ready to take the hits from your staff when you can't make payroll on time? How about if your shipping solution you lose access to? In some of the machine shops I work with, it's literally like hundreds of thousands of capital tied up in a single order, and if this stuff doesn't get out on time, it's a big hit. Poor attention paid to identifying assets is the beginning of a chain of events that ends with compromise, every time. We're going to come back to that case study because this is where the chain of events started that leads to that company being compromised. So that was step one, identify. Most important, the thing you need to do, if you're going to do nothing else when you get home from this and you're going to forget all the other cybersecurity things I talked about, that's fine. I get it. It's Saturday and it's cybersecurity. It's kind of boring. But just catalog everything, at least have a record of it. So when you do have to call us in to respond to the incident, at least I know where everything is. The second piece of the puzzle is protection. You got to map your castle, the way I like to think about it. Now build some walls. Implement some common security controls to prevent compromise. You can start simple and smart. You don't have to contend with the NSA. They're going to get in your network anyway. Don't worry about it. They're already there, let's be honest. But you can start simple. Get some basic stuff in place. This is common sense stuff. Defense in layers, this is where we're going to get a little technical, but there are no, again, there's no panaceas. There's no single product. Microsoft doesn't have it. Google, Amazon, nobody has the single product that solves all this for you. Now, they're all going to tell you AI is going to solve it for you. It's not. You need to have defense in layers. That means you need to employ different techniques, different systems, different capabilities to protect yourself. You need to protect devices, networks, and identities. It's sort of an emerging thing. We think about protection. I think some of the first things people probably think about is like, yeah, we run antivirus. We got McAfee antivirus on our computers. Like, we're good, we're set. That's not what gets attacked anymore, and certainly not in that way. The most common attack now is against identities. It's phishing. It's people stealing passwords, credentials to get into your network to do things like ransomware the whole thing so you'll pay them. Not a lot of people are thinking about identity protection. Ask regularly when you're looking at this stuff, or if you're working with your IT team and they're telling you the stuff that they're putting in place, ask this question a lot. Okay? It's cool. Thank you for that. Cool protection. What if the bad guys get past it? Then what? If they don't have a next answer, like, well, if they get past that, then we have this other technique or this other thing in place. They're not doing what they should be doing. There should be no single layer that can be beaten for them to get the keys to your kingdom. I have some key rules when it comes to protection. One of the first things I do when I come into a business, and it's not a post-incident consult, come in to like help them get things sorted out. First order of business is get everything off of the internet, unless it absolutely needs to be there. And when I say absolutely needs to be there, I mean there's a lot of ways to access things from home, from Starbucks, wherever you work, that don't involve opening that thing to the open internet. When you have stuff on the open internet, Everyone can get to it, everyone can test it, everyone can exploit it, and the moment there's a 0-day vulnerability associated with the product you have on the internet, you're done for. There's a big one that's been dominating the cybersecurity space for the last couple months called Move It. I think it's IP Switch Move It. I don't know if anyone's seen that one in the news. It's been big time, but it's a server a lot of people host right up on the internet to share files to their customers or to their suppliers, things like that. If you don't need stuff on the internet, get it off, otherwise it's open for compromise. If you can access a work system from home, there should be a very good reason for that. For everything else, there's VPNs and smart ways to approach that. So another thing like, hey, if you want 5 things to take home to your IT team, make that one of them. Get them to tell you everything you have that's on the internet and ask, why is it there? Can it come down? Is there another way to do this where that doesn't have to sit up there? Establish protections on the network and on endpoints. A big problem we've seen in the last decade is a lot of enterprises especially invest hundreds of thousands of dollars on big corporate firewalls, big expenses for how we're going to protect the office, and the Wi-Fi is going to be this super cool thing, and it's going to be validated, it's going to use DoD encryption and all this sort of stuff. Okay, your workforce just went home for the last couple of years, and now they do their work from Starbucks or from the phone in their car. Network security is not good enough anymore. We need stuff at the endpoint level. Using single sign-on for accessing business applications and data is a critical protection and a critical maturity step in protecting identities. This is when you can use the same email thing and same password to sign into everything. This makes things a lot easier, especially from a security standpoint. There's way fewer things that can be compromised. It's a concept we call attack surface reduction. It's a way to shrink what attackers can compromise or exploit to get in and do the damage they want to do. Regularly reassess who has access and who should have access. It's a big mistake I see, and most of the time when we come into a new business, especially if we're the first security folks that come in, there's people that have been long gone from a company who still have accounts there that are enabled, that have never had the password reset, and fairly frequently there are cybersecurity incidents where disgruntled employees circle back about a year later and they're like, you know what, screw that company, I've been gone a year, they're not going to know it was me. They pop in, do some damage because no one ever locked them out. So you need to regularly look at who has access to systems, make sure that it's only the appropriate people that do. Protection's not a moat. I'm using a lot of castle metaphors lately, I don't know why. I've got 3 young boys, maybe that's why. We're doing like knights and armor and kind of stuff right now. But protection's not just a moat. The way I think of it, it's a moat and a locked gate, a spiked fence, a locked door, a door alarm, an armed guard, and a combination safe. It's layers. Any one of those things should be compromisable without you losing everything. So that was step 2. And I promise these get a little quicker. There's a little less to do as we go down the pipe. Now, we talked about figure out what everything is. Now do some stuff to protect it, throw up some walls, some gates, locks, whatever. Now we need to focus on detection. Technology is built by humans for now. They say AI is going to start doing it, and Skynet will inevitably come along. But for the meantime, humans build this stuff. That means this stuff is flawed. I've seen a lot of code. I've seen a lot of really bad code, and I've seen a lot of really bad software. And I've seen a lot of really bad software in the manufacturing space. A lot of old stuff, a lot of old code bases that some go back to like the 90s, which is some pretty bad stuff. Compromise of these things is inevitable. So you need to put in place some mechanisms to find bad actors and contain them quickly. I highlight the word inevitable there, and I don't want that to sound hyperbolic, but it's essentially inevitable. Almost everyone's going to get compromised at some point. Now, it could be a very small thing. It could be, someone falls for a stupid phishing thing and buys $1,000 of gift cards. Has anyone had that happen? That happens a lot. But it's going to happen. So put in place some mechanisms to catch this stuff and contain it. In the small manufacturing world, or the small business generally, this is where you have to lean on service providers. And full disclaimer, that is a bias I have. I built a company to do that. So I would say that, right? But it does come from a good place. You can't isn't the right word. You shouldn't focus on building a security operations center that can detect modern security threats. You guys need to focus on what your mission is, which, as I understand it from my clients, is like get parts out the door, right? This isn't your core mission. So sometimes it makes sense to work with a provider, collect log data, get someone looking at what's going on in the system. Employ things like honeypots. This is one of my favorite things to do, is you put a system on a network that looks like a juicy target, and the attackers can't help themselves. And so they'll ping it, they'll do whatever, they'll try to log in. And we set it up with a bunch of alerting, like, hey, if anyone tries to hit this thing, send up some alerts, let us know. It's a great way to catch people in the act, especially when they're doing things like happened in the case study. They're doing recon for weeks. What they were doing all that time was testing logins to things, trying to brute force into things. One honeypot, which there's open source honeypots you can put together, would have caught that. This includes insider threats. Insider threats, one, I don't talk a lot about in this slide deck, but it's one of the largest threats you face, which is people scoping out things they shouldn't be doing. You know, people love to explore what they have access to, and if your HR drive is accessible in some way, they love to find the payroll file. They love to know what everyone else is getting paid. So you can set up some honeypots and catch that sort of thing, and I've seen that successfully deployed. It's easy to get focused on the protection piece. So when you think about cybersecurity, you think about IT, like it's so easy to be like, okay, let's buy a tool, and the tool's gonna protect the thing, and we're done, it's good, we're good to go. I see it all the time. It's an easy trap to fall into. Don't fall into that trap. I get it. Protection's sort of easy to understand. You're going to buy a piece of software, and it's going to sit there on the computer, and you're going to understand that it's doing its job. You work with a security provider. You might not hear from them. You'll be like, what are we paying them for? And then an incident happens. You'll be like, what are we paying them for? Like, weren't they supposed to stop it? Don't fall into that trap. You need someone that's looking at this stuff. You need to have some sort of detection in place. 0 days, misconfigurations, phishing, these beat protections every day. You need someone to look at this. Among the disciplines, this one does require the most specific expertise. And this is an area I do think you should work with experts. I feel like you can do a very passable cybersecurity program otherwise, but developing the ability to detect modern threats is very difficult and requires a significant amount of expertise. Bruce Schneier, I don't expect anyone in this room to know him, but anyone in the cybersecurity space knows this guy. Big personality around encryption and cybersecurity. Has, I think, my favorite quote when it comes to cybersecurity. You can't defend, you can't prevent. The only thing you can do is detect and respond. Now, his point is not that we shouldn't try to prevent and shouldn't try to defend. The point is that, like I stated, it's inevitable that something's going to come through. Right? Unless you're going to take your network offline and make it the most secure network it can be, which is the disconnected one, this stuff's going to happen. So you have to be ready to detect, and you have to be ready to respond, which primes us up for step 4, which is respond. So you work with a security provider. They're detecting things. You've got protections in place. You followed my advice. You're protecting the endpoints. You're watching the identities. It's all being done. You figured everything out. You got the whole map. Boom, something happens. Okay, now what? Got through the protections, and the security people came and said, hey, there's a compromise. You got to do something about it. You need to be prepared to answer it. You need to establish an incident response process before it's needed. I've been party to many ad hoc incident response process drafts that are happening in real time. Now, there is no time like the present, and like anyone else, I tend to come up with a good work product under pressure, but don't make the incident response process something you figure out during the incident response. Establish incident playbooks for critical work. This is super important. These are questions you need to ask and prepare for and have a process, even if it's a couple steps. Lay this out ahead of time. Incidents are stressful as hell, especially when you're a key stakeholder and there's Russian ransom people on the other end of the line saying, pay us $500,000 in Bitcoin, or we're gonna leak all this data and we're never gonna give it back to you. Don't make that stressful time worse by not knowing what to do in response to certain things. So identify the critical stuff that needs to continue to happen for your business to continue, and have a playbook around what happens if that gets compromised or degraded or outright destroyed. What needs to happen? And these are just some questions that come to mind. It's certainly not a panacea, but what happens if your government data is stolen? Do you guys know who you're supposed to call? You know who you're supposed to tell? Do you know how much time you have to tell before they come and say, hey, on top of all that money you're going to pay out on a ransom, you're going to pay us a fine for not telling us in time. What happens if your job management server, which I didn't know if job management's the right word for it, but one of my clients uses Job Boss. I don't know what you guys call that type of tooling, but we've gone through a playbook of like what happens if that gets compromised. What's the shop prepared to do to continue work going out the door without that? Have playbooks around this stuff. Think about like what would be the worst case scenario and lay that out so that if that does come to pass, at least you have a plan. A good identify feeds into a prepared response, and it goes right back to what I just said. If you understand the critical pathways for getting work out the door, you understand the critical systems, the critical people, the data, the processes, take the time, understand that. Then when you prepare your response and you look at playbooks, it tells you where you need to spend your time and attention. On the technical, have a relationship with an expert, or again, work with a security provider. This is another one of those things where you want to have a phone number to call. Now, you don't have to pay them a retainer. A lot of security services or incident response firms, they'll just like have a very informal relationship, but they like to know who you are. They like to know a little bit about your business. That way, if you do call them, there's something of a plan there. So get that relationship going as soon as you can. The biggest thing around response, in my opinion, is table topping. This is where you sit down with your key stakeholders, your executive team, your project managers, the people in your business that are responsible for supervising and whatnot. Do tabletop scenarios. This is important and it's simple. You don't need to overthink this. You guys don't need to Google, what's the most technical thing that's happening right now. You just need to look up like, hey, what's going on in the world? And let's talk about what if that happened to us. Like MGM, everyone track that story, what just happened with them? Does anyone know how they got compromised? Anyone remember reading how it happened? Do you remember how they social engineered it? They called the help desk and said, hey, this is Bob. I need my password reset. And they were like, cool, Bob, here's your new password. Have fun. That was it. These are not highly complex things, but if you just look that up and you think about it and sit down with your team and say, like, okay, so we have a managed service provider that deals with our IT. Why don't we have a tabletop with them and talk through, like, what if that happens? Like, shit, what are they doing to protect against that? Are they just giving out passwords because they recognize sort of like, that kind of sounds Bob. He sounds kind of sick or under the weather, but mostly sounds like him. Strangely Eastern European accent to him, though. Right? Talk about this stuff. Doesn't have to be complicated. I do these all the time with our clients. We sit down for half a day, and we just go through a list of like, okay, what happens? Like I mentioned, your Job Boss server goes offline. How long till that's terrible? How long till it closes your doors? How long does my team have to get it back in place from the backups before you're, in dire straits? Talk through it. This will bring to light so many things that can feed right back into the identify, and that's why it's this nice, pretty circle, right? When you tabletop this stuff, you're going to talk through, and you're going to hear things from people that you probably didn't think about, because you're going to talk through a scenario, and some project manager somewhere is going to be like, hey, we're using this system. We're using SharePoint for file delivery over here, not Dropbox. The whole business is using Dropbox, but this one project had to be different. You're going to find that stuff out by tabletopping. Of the functions in the framework, the response function is most often the least mature until we see what I call a forced maturity event, which is an incident response. Everyone learns a lot and becomes really good at incident response management during an incident. We create a lot of good incident responders in real time, but you don't want to make them when it's needed. You want them to be there ahead of time. And lastly, the final step in this is recover. This is the culmination step of all your work. If you've done a proper identify of your critical assets, you've done a proper analysis on what response to threats will prompt preparation to bring these assets back post-incident. I phrased that really weird. Do a proper identify and a proper analysis on what you need to do to get this stuff back. That's what I meant. At a system level, this is backups. Now, this shouldn't be an unfamiliar concept. I hope it's not. I hope everyone here is familiar with the idea we can back up stuff. At the business level, this is continuity planning. And again, with cybersecurity, I want you to think more than just the servers in the network room and the geeky stuff. This is business level stuff now. Does anyone here have a business that doesn't run on technology? Is anyone here just on paper? Okay, if you're just on paper, I want to talk to you. This will be a fascinating case study of how you're still in business, but still. So this is important stuff. And don't ignore communications planning. One of the fun things that we dealt with the case study was because it was pandemonium, it was chaos. My phone was ringing because it was the director of IT, and then it was the chief, systems engineer, then it was a help desk guy. Everyone coming to me with different things and different questions, and there was like no communication plan. There was no pin the rose on somebody until many hours into the event to say, hold on, this one person's going to do all the contact. They'll reach out to the customers. They'll be the ones to tell them what's going on. Plan for this stuff. My note on backups, and this is another one of those things, like maybe of the 5 that I want you to take back to your team. Backups aren't real if they aren't tested regularly. And I highly, highly recommend demand proof of this. If you have a managed service provider, you have an IT team, they might be the nicest people in the world. Trust nothing. When it comes to backups, when it comes to the critical data and the critical systems that without your business would shut down, demand proof that they regularly restore those backups and make sure that stuff's going to be functional. I have seen it post-incident. We're like, hey, we're fine. The compromise is not a big deal. We got backups. And they go to restore the backups, and what do the backups do? They fail. And when was the last time they tested restore? Oh, 2-3 years ago? Cool. You guys prepared to lose 2-3 years of records? 2-3 years of work? It'd be pretty devastating, and I've seen that. So demand proof that this is happening. The second thing with backups, I have to insist on, you have to take this back to your team and make sure it's being done, is these things have to be air-gapped. What I mean by air-gapped is there has to be a copy of your backup data somewhere that is not using the same identity structure as your normal backups. It shouldn't have the same username and password to log in. It shouldn't be on the same network as everything else. And there's a wonderful rule called the 3-2-1 rule of backups. You make 3 copies of your data. So one's the production copy, one's a direct copy nearby, and one needs to be air-gapped and off-site, probably with somebody else. There are providers who will do this. They'll keep a copy of your data safe and sound with them. You can even go further. You can put data to tape, once every 6 months, send it to Iron Mountain, where it's going to be in a facility, underground, nuclear proof if it's like that serious. But you have to have air-gap backups. This doesn't directly apply to this, but this is one of my favorite things that I was ever told early on in my career when I was just a young help desk technician. Everyone has a test environment. It's the lucky ones who also have a production environment. What I mean by that is sometimes you have a test/production environment. You don't always have 2 separate ones. So we're going to tie it together. And the way we're going to tie it together is this case study I shared. In the aftermath of all this, I was involved in the post-op. I was part of putting together a report to brief the executive team and then to ultimately brief the large prime contractor who owned the subsidiary. And we did an in-depth sort of investigation of how this all happened. It started, like I mentioned, with poor identification. They had a corporate VPN. They had a VPN between their sites, and then a way that you from home could access work stuff. They didn't have it on their visibility. It wasn't in their security controls for assets that needed protection. They were like out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, it's a username and password. It's a VPN. What's the worst that could happen? Well, because it was out of sight, out of mind, there was no visibility. When they decided, hey, let's do the right thing, let's get multi-factor, rolled out to everybody, they forgot to do it on the VPN. So now all I need from my Russian hacking computer is your username and password, and I can get on your VPN. They had poor protections in place. A very basic phishing email was able to get through. A phishing link was clicked, followed, and nothing was there to scan it, to prevent it. There was poor user education. And then, when those credentials were lost, they had no protections to stop lateral movement. So the attackers got this poor guy's credentials, who also was their sort of security administrator. That guy had a really rough couple months because he was like the security guy. But he made some big mistakes. His account had all the administrative rights too. Big no-no. That's his daily driver account, the one that he logs into everything with. Also had all the admin rights. That can be a big problem. So he gives up his credentials, and now they're very easily moving around. They had poor detection. They had some in place, but it was like they bought a tool. I mean, they trusted, oh, this tool will tell us what's going on. Yeah, they bought a poor tool that just sort of told you if like some active malware was running, told them nothing about the weeks of these people poking around their network, figuring everything out. So nobody saw the literal hundreds of attempts to use this guy's credentials to log into stuff. Or the fact that suddenly this guy's working 24 hours a day. Because right about 6 o'clock, he goes home, 2 hours later, he's back online, and wow, he's doing a lot of weird stuff. No one looking. They had a very poor response capability, and in fact, they had none. This created a ton of chaos, excessive downtime, forced reliance on expensive consultants over a weekend, and it took days to figure out what was going on. I was on conference calls literally like 8-10 hours for the first couple days, charging a hefty hourly rate because they ruined my weekend. And there were like 8 other consultants all in there. That's where some of that money went. Then they had a very poor recover, and this is what ultimately killed them. And this is why air gapping is super important. They did not account for proper backup air gapping. They lost their backups. They thought they did because they had multiple locations in the US. And they said, oh, you know what? We'll just copy our backups across all the locations, which are all connected by a single VPN, and use the same login to access all of them to administer it. So for the attackers, they just had to figure out where the other backups were, stage their attack, and they blew them all away. We're talking like 80 terabytes of data or something, all lost, or potentially lost. They ended up paying the ransom. They got the majority of it back. But ultimately, they led that payout. And you can see the chain that I'm trying to tie this back to. Like any step here, if they had paid attention to, they'd have stopped this. They wouldn't have had to pay out that $500,000. They wouldn't have lost all that time. They had just done some basic stuff here. And that's the thing with so much of this stuff is don't be scared about the news you see like, oh, China's coming after us, and China, the advanced persistent threat. That's not who's really coming after us in the small and medium business segment. Most attacks are coming from lazy people who just want quick wins. Don't be a quick win. You put a couple layers in place, they will move on. They don't want to waste their time because there's millions of other systems they can go get, hundreds of thousands of other companies that aren't listening to this stuff that they'll move on to. You put some basic stuff in place, they don't have an interest in messing with you. Now, if you're involved in the F-35 strike program, okay, you might be a specific target of China. Definitely possible. Or a couple other things. I know some of the stuff we're fielding in Ukraine, some of the weapon systems that we've provided over there, the defense contractors involved in that have seen some activity. So everyone's heard this idiom, and it applies to so many things in life. It applies especially so in cybersecurity. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Before I move on to sort of my final thoughts, nothing I've laid out here is super expensive. I hope everyone's sort of catching that. This is not 6 figures necessarily of stuff that has to be done. This is stuff you can take back to the existing team you have today, and you guys can figure some of this out even if no one is IT on staff. Or maybe you have an IT provider, an MSP. They can help you with some of this stuff. And if you don't have either of those and you want help with this, there are lots of reputable and good companies that can help you with this. And it doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg. I promise you, it's not going to be as expensive as what I just heard about air conditioning, 100,000 square feet. Okay, that's going to be a lot worse. OSHA's worse. We'll see. But this is not crazy stuff. This is not complex. This is not stuff. Hopefully, no one's sitting here like, I wish this guy would explain this in simpler terms. Like, this is easy at this level. We can get into all the like super technical stuff, but we can do this stuff that I've covered. So I have a list of minimums, and this is, I don't know if the slides are being sent out. I've seen a couple cell phones taking pictures. Feel free, but ideally the slides will go out. And if they don't, you can find me and I'll email them to you or whatever. But if you want just like a simple list, like print this out and be like, here, IT team, do these and tell me. First off, remember what I said, trust nothing, demand proof. I'm an IT guy. Take it from me, trust nothing, okay? IT people like to cut corners, I've seen it. Demand the proof, this is important stuff. Get your things off the internet. If they don't need to be there, get them off. I'm serious, get it off there. Phishing training and protection is a must. Ideally, training that's not, am I allowed to curse here? And I was like, okay, phishing training, a lot of it's bullshit, straight up. Maybe find some training that's not bullshit, but find some people you can work with, like have a real talk about it, whatever, do it at your all staff. I know most people see this, they see that dreaded email in their inbox, it's like, hey, you've been assigned training. And you're like, oh, cool, let me watch this stupid, poorly acted video that makes really bad jokes for 5 minutes and teaches me nothing. There are alternatives out there. Find a reputable provider. They can help you put together a brief training program that tells people what they need to actually know to prevent this stuff. Multi-factor authentication, no exceptions. If you can log into it, it should be behind MFA. This shouldn't be controversial in 2023. I've been fighting this battle for a long time, and most everyone now is like, yeah, we get it, shut up about it. But we still, every time I go somewhere, I see it. Just took over for another managed security provider last week. We came in, and this provider had been telling this company, you guys are fully compliant with like CMMC, if anyone's tracking that. First thing we noticed, like within a minute of logging in, I'm like, oh, look at that. All their administrative accounts, no MFA, cool, great. They're definitely compliant, having none of that basic stuff in place. You need to have this in place. This is an easy way to get compromised, please.
Can I quickly ask a question about MFA?
You absolutely should.
Every person in the company has to have it.
Yes.
Every login, including shipping clerks. And that is, they use their own device or a company provided device.
I would put MFA everywhere. Now, I'm the security guy. I'm going to be the low-risk guy there, but this isn't unreasonable in 2023. Like, I get it if it was difficult, but asking people to do something as simple as look at your phone and get a 6-digit code, I'm going to slow you down by 10 seconds, that's a fine trade-off. The question you should ask is if the people that you don't want to give MFA to, if the data and systems they have access to, you can afford anyone to access from any country and they can take it offline, if you can afford that loss, okay. No big deal, leave MFA off.
Well, on that topic, we don't want all of our employees with their cell phones out. So what other good MFA solutions are you using?
I see some people raising hands in response. Do you guys have answers for it?
We have a firewall on our screen, so with our firewall, it has a token. So we just bought a whole bunch of tokens, so that's how we ran it.
Give little pieces of hardware.
And then on our, unfortunately, I'm working with my ERP to try to harmonize that because then I have to use a YubiKey,
Which is that little token.
pull that out, so now I have employees have to use 2 MFA physical devices, and I'm not really happy with that. But that's just where I'm at right now, because like I said, no one provided that and everything, so. But they're, yeah, it's like YubiKey cost me $20, and I give it to them, I just make sure I get it back at the end of the day, if they leave me or disable it, but, because I'm gonna be honest, I'm the guy that did get busted and had a ransomware. Luckily, I had a backup that was only a day old, but it shut my facility down for days. Since that process, I've changed ERPs and stuff like that, learned a lot. So I'm extremely anally retentive about security because it was a nightmare.
You're a qualified incident responder now. You didn't want to be, but you are.
But anyway, so there's some things you just got to start looking at. You got to make sure your appliances that you're using have those tools, and if they don't, then they're too old.
Yeah, this is, like I said, this is a battle I've been fighting. I've been yelled at by many a shop floor employee who's like, dude, been doing this since before you were born. I've been cutting these parts. Get your stupid technology out of my face. I get it. I've had that battle. This stuff has to come from the executive team. This has to be culture shift at organizations that want to exist in the modern world. There has to be executive buy-in to feed it down. I understand, like, you don't want cell phones or stuff on the floor. There are alternatives. Even with MFA, there are alternatives where not having MFA is not the worst thing. But if anything's certainly accessible, like if I can go home or go to Starbucks and access it, it better be behind MFA. Because if I can get to it from anywhere, so can everyone else. And everyone else now has AI on their side that they can say like, hey, AI bot, scan the whole internet and find me some easy to compromise stuff. Find me some email passwords. Let me buy some credentials off the dark net from people's personal emails that got compromised where they saved their passwords in a text file or whatever. This stuff is so easy to do now. Someone else had a hand up.
Inside the building versus outside the building? You're saying MFA for everyone inside the building?
Yes. Yes. So there's a concept I'm kind of bringing up on the next slide, zero trust. I'm sure you've all heard this, and it's sort of a nonsensical term. I have a very simple way of putting it. Like, it just means assume it's breached. Like, think in a way that there's already enemies inside the castle. So your super cool walls you spent all that money building in the modern world don't mean a whole lot. So we don't see, in the cybersecurity space anymore, I don't see a lot of difference between inside your building and outside because we've been so bad at preventing people getting inside. We have to assume to be responsible providers of security, we have to assume there's people already in. Because a lot of times there are. Yeah, good.
You said get everything off the internet, but then you say lean into the cloud.
Yes.
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
I can. Can I come back to that? Can I finish
Sure.
this? I just want to get the minimums out. So, like I said, accurate inventory, get everything cataloged, update it like quarterly. Now, I say update no less than quarterly. I'm willing to bend on this one a little bit, make it annual if you have to, especially if it's a very static environment. Again, a lot of the organizations I work with are like software startups, and they're hiring 30 people a day, and their teams are spinning up infrastructure everywhere. They need to move a lot. Manufacturing environment, maybe not a lot of change. Be reasonable with it, but on a good cadence, update it. Patch systems, I know a lot of this stuff is like, would you get beat over the skull with? You see this on LinkedIn or whatever marketing material. They're like, patch your systems. It's a no-brainer, patch your systems. If you're working with an IT provider, it's another thing where you should demand proof. Don't allow them to say like, oh yeah, it's all good, we're patched. Demand proof, show me the reports. Let's randomly sample a couple computers. Let's see if they're where they should be. So stuff that, again, I'm bringing it back, like the leadership teams, you guys have to be dealing in this stuff. You have to get educated enough to call other people out to make sure they're doing what they should be doing, the same way you would your accounting team, making sure that money's being moved the way it should be moved. Lock, delete unused or old accounts. Again, good inventory. Do this monthly. Make sure that only people who still work at the company and need the access have it. Adopt cloud services. We're going to come back to this. This is not a fix-all, but it certainly eliminates a lot of the risks we see. Set up an incident response plan. Do this before you need it and tabletop regularly. Set up some system baselines and enforce them. You don't need to do, like, I don't know if anyone's in the DoD world, you don't need to do STIGs. That's not what I'm telling you. Just some basic, good hygiene. That's what we're looking for. Keep your backups out of band and air-gapped. Test these restores regularly. Demand the proof. And then establish security logs to a central location. Make sure that you at least have logs to support an investigation and an incident response, but better yet, get someone to watch those things and tell you what's going on. So now, my other thoughts, my closing thoughts. We're going to skip zero trust, but I figured, like, I see so much marketing bogus about zero trust, and there's always like a funny little quip. Well, there's like a little trust. It's not zero. Like, you have to trust something. But it just means assume it's all breached. Assume the classic perimeter you've set up is infiltrated. Act accordingly. That's all those layers that you then build. The cloud, not a panacea. Often the most effective improvement for IT and security. So I advise people to lean into it. When I say get things off the internet, what I generally mean is operating systems that you manage, that you host. When you have a Windows server that hosts remote desktop so your people can log in to JobBoss from home, that remote desktop is one of the most attacked services in the world, one of the easiest to compromise. And I think 9 out of the last 10 incidents I worked were because an RDP server was on the internet. The stuff you host, was that what happened? Okay. I'm not making this stuff up, guys. Okay? I promise. I'm not full of it entirely. So the stuff you host, get it off the internet. VPNs is another big one we've been taking down a lot. Like a lot of people have a company firewall that's had a VPN, and they've moved a lot of stuff to the cloud. They don't need the VPN anymore, but they've like left it dormant for years. And every once in a while, maybe like someone needs to come in to get some file off an old file server or whatever. But regularly we go through and we're like, we don't need this, kill it. It's a way that someone can get in and move around and do stuff. So it's the stuff you host. Now the cloud, like I said, not a panacea. I'm sure everyone occasionally sees the reports where it's like, hey, Microsoft just got hacked. And China got like all the State Department emails. So it's not like we can absolutely trust Microsoft, but Microsoft spends about $1 billion a year on security. I don't think that's in the budget for anyone here. Doesn't mean they're spending it wisely all the time. They do some silly stuff. But when you properly lean into the cloud and you're smart about it, a lot of it has to do with taking workloads off the internet and giving yourself ways to access them, and then getting rid of a ton of overhead. Like, there's a ton of financial reason to lean into the cloud. Big capital expenditures are no longer a thing. You don't need to buy whole server farms. You operationalize your expenses. Now it's just monthly stuff. Now I know it gets kind of tiring. Everyone's getting bored with monthly subscriptions for Netflix and everything else. And now we're like, here, monthly subscription for your business. Like, yes, let's all sign up for that. I get it's kind of difficult from that standpoint, but there's a ton of upside to it. AI, this is one I've been getting beaten over the head with by all the vendors that service my industry, and I'm sure it's coming for everyone. AI today, it's poorly named. These are language models. These are mathematical models that basically just like use some complex math to determine what the next thing they should say is. These are not creative thinking things. We're about 1% of the way of where this is going. Now it's gonna happen where it's gonna start compounding on itself, and it is gonna get kind of weird. And it's already proven to be a game changer in a lot of ways. Billionaires are coming from all industries. There's gonna be a startup in every major industry or several startups where billions are gonna be made by bringing you an AI solution to a problem you have. Now it's gonna affect workforces. It's gonna be very weird, is the way I anticipate it. It's gonna be difficult. Last thing, outsourcing security. Again, disclaimer. You can outsource your security to a company like mine. I'm not saying this to make you think that, but it can be a wise investment. I want you to focus on your mission. Don't want you guys to become cybersecurity experts. I want you to have enough knowledge to come to a company like me and be able to call us on our bullshit, because we're often in our industry full of it, right? And I often come in after the fact of someone who's acted very poorly with a client for years, sold them lines and lines of bullshit about how compliant they were, how ready for the government assessment they are. And again, the first thing we see when we come in is like, the administrator accounts are accessible from anywhere, don't have MFA. What are we talking about here? So I want you guys to have the knowledge to check people on that. But seriously, please use MFA. Thank you. Yeah. I would say only useful if you've done a lot of what I've already talked about. Like, we get asked to do stuff like that here and there, or we'll get asked to come in and do like a cybersecurity compliance assessment. I'm like, can I just ask you like 3 questions first? Like, is MFA everywhere? Do you have a security baseline? And do you have an IR plan? If you say no to those 3 things, I'm like, don't pay me 20 grand to tell you you're terrible, right? Same thing with a pen test. Like, if you already know, like, I think you know, if you probably know in the back of your head, you're like, oh, shoot, our IT is not in a good spot. A pen test is going to tell you that, and you're going to be like, okay, that wasn't a lot of bang for a buck. I kind of already felt that. But if you've done a lot of this stuff and you've done a lot of steps and you have an IT team who's demonstrated progress, like a pen test is a good way to call them on it.
Well, I look at it as like an auditor.
Yeah.
An independent auditor check my accounting, I use one also for my IT.
Absolutely.
It sounds like you have a very sophisticated setup.
Yeah, if you're already on a maturity journey and you've done a lot of good stuff, like a third-party assessor coming in is a good thing. And if anyone here is in the defense industry, you've been tracking or hearing about CMMC, which is a whole other thing. Happy to talk about that, because that's a world I spend way too much time in. But that's the whole thing with this, is they've been telling contractors for years, do all this cybersecurity stuff, follow our rules. And everyone's been signing the contract like, we'll follow that, you got it, government. And then the government's like, okay, tell us about the rules you've been following. And everyone's like, what? Oh, what? We haven't been doing that. You were serious? Yeah, it was in the contract. So now the government's like, okay, now we need to send some people to check you guys. That's coming down the pipe.
Andy, we got one question here.
First of all, great presentation, very
Thank you.
practical advice. I loved the example of someone calling the help desk, and I thought I would, if I could, this is only 20 seconds long or something, I'm going to play something for you here.
Hey, Julia, I'm in a tight spot and I need your help. I'm on site with Tramtrek right now. We're having trouble getting into their site. I thought it would be best to contact you directly. I've gone through our normal procedures and I'm hitting a wall. I know it's a big request, but can you send me my creds for their site, please? Just text me at this number if you have any questions. I'll be with them all day, so if you could send that to me whenever you can, that would be awesome. I appreciate your help, and yeah, thanks, Julia.
I love it.
I never said any of that. That wasn't me. That was, they took a sample of my voice. Our security team, this is from one of our internal security trainings. And they got my permission first, but they took a segment of my voice, used off-the-shelf software, and made that recording.
Yeah, this is where AI and deep fakes is really gonna get bad.
So it's a little bit.
But I love what they did there because they hit. Hopefully, a couple people had the alarm bell ringing in the back of their head on a couple of things that were said there, because those are like the most obvious social engineering techniques. Create an immediate sense of urgency. Now, we haven't really met, so I don't really know who you are in your business, but I assume you're someone with some authority at your business?
Yeah, I'm one of the founders.
Okay, exactly. So there's a sense of urgency. We're at the client site, I need this now. There's an attempt to go outside normal protocol, saying, hey, I've tried all the normal stuff, it's not working. There's the appeal to authority, like, hey, I'm the boss, okay? I get what I ask for, right? These are super common techniques. If you haven't seen this stuff, your employees are probably all getting text messages right now to their personal phones, because the attackers look you guys up on LinkedIn, by the way, and they say, let me find the CEO of Acme Corp, all right, and let me find, the accountant at Acme Corp. Okay, let me OSINT this person real quick, let me find their personal email or personal phone. Cool, I'm gonna text them and say, hey, it's me, Bob, CEO at Acme Corp. I need your help. I'm really trying to do something really nice and super cool for the employees. I need you to buy some gift cards that I can distribute at the company meeting tomorrow. The person's like, Bob, CEO, wants me to help? Definitely, I'll do that. This happened like last year at one of my clients. And it was like the most obvious scam that you could fall for in hindsight, but the person was just like so well motivated. They're like, I want to do the right thing. Like, this is so cool. We're going to help other employees out. And then like spent $3,000 on gift cards before they were like, wait a minute. I think I might have just done something silly.
All right, Andy.
No. My short answer on CMMC, prepare for it. It's not coming at the earliest, I'd say, until this time next year. More than likely, the rule will go into final, I'd bet a lot of money, Q1 25. Yep. I'm happy, I know there's like a link, a networking break afterward. I'm happy to get into all that. My company's a CMMC assessor company. So like yesterday, I was on a call with the Cyber AB getting the latest. So I'm happy to share.
Awesome job, Andy. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for making it real and giving us some real ideas on how to overcome it. So with that, we're going to take a break. Now, next door, we've got snacks and coffee and stuff like that. All the swag that's left out, go ahead and grab it, all right? So those people don't, that way our proud sponsors don't have to carry it back home with them. And we'll be back up here at 10:50, all right? 20 minutes.
it's not there. Oh Lord, it's hurting me. I got away for a little while, but then it came back much harder. Till I ever hold you out there again, will it be mine? 'Cause I'm on a ghost ship drowning my heart in Hong Kong. It's the last right board in here tonight, out in the bay. I need a landing in you to shine out, bright rays. Feeling out of body here, what can I do? It's up to the top every day to join with you. I had to get away for a little while, but then it came back much harder. Till I ever hold you out there again, will it be mine? 'Cause I'm on a ghost ship drowning my heart in Hong Kong. It's the last right board in here tonight, out in the bay. I need a landing in you to shine out, bright rays. Till I ever hold you out there again, will it be mine? 'Cause I'm on a ghost ship drowning my heart in Hong Kong. It's the last right board in here tonight, out in the bay. I need a landing in you to shine out, bright rays, bright rays, bright rays. Love is such a pretty thing, oh, but lately it's been hard to find. this time. But I believe the world is burning to the ground. Oh well, I guess we're gonna find out. Let's see how far we've come. Let's see how far we've come. Well, I believe it all is coming to an end. Oh well, I guess we're gonna pretend. Let's see how far we've come. Let's see how far we've come. I think it turned 10 o'clock, but I don't really know. And I can't remember caring for an hour or so. Started crying and I couldn't stop myself. I started running, but there's nowhere to run to. I sat down on the street, took a look at myself. Said, where you going, man? You know the world is headed for hell. Say your goodbyes if you got someone you can say goodbye to. I believe the world is burning to the ground. Oh well, I guess we're gonna find out. Let's see how far we've come right now. Let's see how far we've come. I believe it all is coming to an end. Oh well, I guess we're gonna pretend. Let's see how far we've come. Oh, yeah. Let's see how far we've come. It's gone, gone, baby, it's all gone. There's no one in the corner and there's no one at home. Well, it was cool, cool, it was just all cool. Now it's over for me and it's over for you. Well, it's gone, gone, baby, it's all gone. There's no one on the corner and there's no one at home. Well, it was cool, cool, it was just all cool. Now it's over for me and it's over for you. I believe the world is burning to the ground. Oh well, I guess we're gonna find out. Let's see how far we've come. Let's see how far we've come. Yeah, well, I believe it all is coming to an end. Oh well, I guess we're gonna pretend. Let's see how far we've come. Oh yeah, let's see how far we've come. 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 Coming out of my cage and I've been doing just fine. Gotta be down because I want it all. It started out with a kiss, how did it end up like this? It was only a kiss, it was only a kiss. Now I'm falling asleep and she's calling a cab while he's having a smoke and she's taking a drag. Now they're going to bed and my stomach is sick and it's all in my head, but she's touching his chest. Now he takes off her dress. Now you can dip your feet every once and a little while. You sit there in your heartache, waiting on some beautiful boy to save you from your old ways. You play forgiveness, watching now, here he comes. He doesn't look a thing like Jesus, but he talks like a gentleman, like you imagined when you were young. Talks like a gentleman, like you imagined when you were young. I said he doesn't look a thing like Jesus. He doesn't look a thing like Jesus. But more than you'll ever know. It's been 1 week since you looked at me. Cocked your head to the side and said I'm angry. 5 days since you laughed at me, saying get that together, come back and see me. 3 days since the living room. I realized it's all my fault, but couldn't tell you. Yesterday you'd forgiven me, but it'll still be 2 days till I say I'm sorry.
Hold it now and watch a hoodwink. Does it make you stop think? You'll think you're looking at Aquaman. I summon fish to the dish, although I like the chalet Swiss. I like the sushi cause it's never touch a frying pan. Hot like wasabi when I bust rhymes. Big like Leanne rhymes because I'm all about value. Bert Camper's got the mad hits. You try to match wits. You try to hold me but I bust through. Gonna make a break and take a fake out like a stinking ink and shake out like vanilla. It's the finest of the flavors. Gonna see the show cause then you'll know the vertigo is gonna go cause it's so dangerous.
All right, NTMA, let's bring this thing home. Come on in from out there in the hallway. Let's bring this thing home. So you've made a lot of good connections so far. These connections will continue, excuse me, through the NTMA Connect community. So you'll have to log into Impexium. If you don't know how to get in, just see Carrie. She'll get your login in there. It's an online community similar to like the roundtable discussion you have where you can post anything and have discussions about it. Does it require MFA? That's a great question. I don't know. Anybody here on Impexium? It doesn't require MFA. All right, excellent. Well, I'm not going on there. So our final closing keynote here is Scott Carter. Scott's going to talk to a little bit about virtual reality. I've had a chance, Scott, to check out your resume. Holy smokes, congrats on all the progress at AT&T. And this is one I'm super excited to learn. Take it away, Scott.
Thank you. So how many people were at the 80s event last night? Did everybody get a chance to go? That was really great. Yeah. I saw a few people. It was an 80s party, but I saw a few people partying like it was 1999. Right. Thank you. Anybody else a Stephen Covey fan? I've been a Stephen Covey fan for 20, 30 years. I love Stephen Covey, and so this is one of my favorite quotes from the Habits of Highly Effective People. Habit number 2, begin with the end in mind. So as I'm talking today and as we have conversations, that's one of the things I'd like for you to think about. Thinking about what is the end in mind that you have? What are you trying to accomplish? So for a lot of businesses, and I heard it on the tour yesterday when we went to Major, what I heard, there was a question that came up about, at the end, and I was overhearing the conversation about, it's so hard to find employees today. I can't even get them to come to the interview. And then if I do hire them, they don't show up for work on the first day. So there are a lot of challenges that businesses are facing and that you're facing, and you're not the only ones facing it. Every major corporation, even a Fortune 10 company like AT&T, is facing those same challenges. So initially, though, there's also increasing complexity. It was mentioned earlier, I think Andy mentioned IoT, and you're going to have, and then OSHA as an example with that. there's lots of opportunity for IoT from what OSHA is talking about, and it's going to be about how do we simplify that complexity? How can we make that easier and bring that down to smaller businesses? And that usually comes with scale. You're familiar with the RFID as a great example of something like that, where tags cost several dollars a tag. Back when I started my career, just before the year 2000, and thanks to Walmart and everybody else, those tags came down to pennies a piece. So things are going to continue those costs are going to continue to drive down, but complexity continues to grow. Andy also talked about AI. You've got generative AI, large language models, all kinds of things that are happening in the world today, and it's just making it harder and harder. Running CNC machines, you may have old software, you get a new machine, it has new software. How do I train on that? I have a problem with that. The skills gap, schools just aren't giving companies what they need right out of school. So, is there anybody who's been able to take an employee fresh out of school and just put them on a machine or put them, to work without some sort of training? Probably the answer is no, right? So you have to fill in that gap. That gap continues to grow because you've got a need to fill jobs, and you don't have people with the right training to do it. So now you're going to have to train them. And you have to think, well, are they interested in this kind of training? How can I keep them? Because I'm going to put a lot of investment in them. What are the things I can do to try to keep them for that after I've trained them and put all that expense to work there? Additionally, and finally, is the overall labor shortage isn't just finding because people don't want to work. It's also because people are getting near retirement and everybody wants to leave working. Another challenge with that, not only are you going to have fewer people to work with, but they're taking knowledge with them, things that you didn't realize they knew until they're gone, and then you're in trouble and you've got an issue with that. So some of the things I'm going to talk about today, they seem like they're science fiction. Almost everything I'm going to show you today is science fact, and they're things that are actually being deployed by other companies today, things that are being done with the Department of Defense, work that's being done in there. The Department of Defense is moving at top speed around these kinds of technologies. And so that goes back to thinking about those RFID tags and how things are driven down. Once things go into government, they're going to come at you then very quickly, and you'll be able to take advantage of them along the way. So what if there was a day, and I'm telling you that day is actually here today, this is real, what you're seeing here. You're seeing a third-person view of what the person is seeing in the headset. But what if you had a 3D model and you could train at your desk on that 3D model with this valve as an example, and you had step-by-step work instructions. So in essence, anybody could become an expert by picking up a headset, picking up a tablet, picking up a phone, and holding it out and looking through the screen and seeing similar to what this person's seeing on the HoloLens device that they have here. But they could train step-by-step on a 3D model at their desk or anywhere. They could train at home, wherever it was easiest to train for that. And they've got those step-by-step work instructions that a subject matter expert put together, not a coder or a developer, but just somebody who may be near retirement, and you're trying to capture their knowledge into some format that's reusable. Because it's one thing to have a checklist, and the military was big on this. They have lots of PDF checklists. People have to take laptops out. They go through those checklists, and they call that digital, right? That's not really digital. That just took paper and put it on a computer. Doesn't make it any easier for anybody to use or make it easier for them to understand. But the kinds of things that we can do today with a platform like this as an example is take those step-by-step work instructions that the subject matter expert put together, didn't need to be a developer or a coder to do this, just needed to have the knowledge and to place this here. And you can see they can take a 3D model. They can say step number 6 is to remove this nut here. And if I don't know what that means, I can pull up a video, which is what you're seeing there. There's an additional video. Again, the subject matter expert just pulls out his phone and records that video and then attaches it to those work instructions so that you have those work instructions with you. Then after training on the 3D model, you can go on site and actually do the work on the physical object itself. This can be any type of machinery. We're showing this valve here because this is what was being used in the military. But any type of machinery that you have, this is being used all across the country. Actually, it's being used outside the United States as well for this type of training. But you can see these call outs that are here, step 18, it's clear what step I'm on and what I'm supposed to be doing. And if it's not, I can always pull this 3D model back up and I can use my super X-ray vision, right? I get this superpower with this type of technology to be able to do these kinds of things, like even pull up, you saw the PDF and the other parts there. So this is easily done today. It's actually in the cloud. You can have it on premise. The military has asked for it on premise, so we have it as something that can be deployed on premise, but it's also just available on the cloud, and it's hosted on Azure. And if you don't like Azure, it can also be hosted elsewhere in the cloud. But again, to what Andy said, most everything is moving to the cloud. It's super easy to manage that way and takes away all those security headaches that you have on that. So you might be asking, though, okay, this is all great. I get that it's real and that it can work, but will people really use it? And how does that help me differentiate from those first three things that I talked about? Well, the first is a 75% retention rate. And in this particular study, they looked at people that would read things, like I mentioned, that PDF and those work instructions and what they do, and how much of that can they remember, versus if they were trained in a more immersive way like this. In this study, it was done with VR, just as the example. But when they were trained, they retained 75% of that information. Now, anybody who's been to school knows sitting listening to the teacher talk or doing something like that, right? You agree with these, 10% retention is true, but in this particular study, it showed 75% retention. So you're getting more bang for your buck when you train in an immersive platform like this. So how can I keep people after I've trained them, or how can I attract new talent that would be interested to work for my company? Well, people also prefer this type of training. So when you give people something that they want and in a way that they prefer to have it, this is probably what leads to that 75% retention rate as well. But it's also something where, like, wow, this really differentiates your company from other companies I had talked to. You're really looking at the future, and I want to be part of the future and grow the business with you. And so that's how you retain employees and move them on. And then the last one is just desktop training. I think everybody knows hands-on training is the best way to go. When you can't, you've got to use a computer. You have too much of a scaffolding around you when you're using the computer. As you know, you've got questions. It'll say, answer A, B, C, or all the above, those kinds of things. And that's kind of a scaffolding. But when you get out into the real world, there's no A, B, C, D, or E, or all the above, and you don't know what to do. Having tools like this has been proven to be much more effective. Virtual reality, augmented reality, spatial computing, mixed reality, those all fall under an umbrella that I call extended reality, or XR. How many people in here, I'll start with virtual reality, how many people in here have actually had on a VR headset and utilized it? Look at that, most people in the room. So you might have had a larger headset on. This is smaller. They don't look much larger than the safety goggles that go over your glasses like we wore yesterday and around that you probably have in your shops. So these are VR. These are only a couple $100, and they're all self-contained. They don't have to be plugged into a computer like we used to have to do, I would say in the 80s and 90s, but heck, I mean, even just about 10 years ago and almost 5 years ago, you couldn't get something like this in this small of a form factor to use and at this price point. And so this is a good way to get started, and these are just VR. And what VR means is when I put these on my head, I can't see anything outside in the physical world. It's completely occluded from me. I only see what's presented on the screens that are inside here, and they're close to my eyes to be able to see that. But because of that, it's so immersive. If you put these on, and probably if you were in VR, you did a lot of fun stuff like ride a roller coaster or mountain bike or climb a mountain. And if you're like me and you don't like to do those things in real life, when you go into VR, your palms start sweating. You start to have a real physical reaction to it because your brain really feels like you're there. You're doing those things that you're seeing. And that's why the 75% retention rate also probably happens, right? Because it is just like being on the job training and going through those training cycles to do that. So that's virtual reality. They used to be bigger. They're coming down in size. You might hear companies like Meta or what used to be Facebook. They're really big and they're driving down their prices on their headsets. This happens to be from HTC. It's called the HTC Flow. It has an external battery pack. So that's what makes these so small. What oftentimes makes those devices so large is because they do have to have power. They're powering these little screens in there. These are 4K, becoming 8K type screens, so better than what you probably have on your wall at home, right here wearing on your head now. And you know, those 8K glasses, those 8K type headsets are around $1,000 or so. You know, maybe a little bit more, give or take. But they've got a lot more going on with them than just those screens that are in there. There are also sensors on the outside, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to spatial. Augmented reality, if you are a social media person, you probably have used a filter. You may have used it on your iPhone or other Android type device where you hold the camera up to your face, and it's using the camera from your phone to place objects over the top of you. We did a project just last year with a major jewelry retailer, and they had to, and they were asking for, how can we put jewelry on people's ears without them touching it? They were thinking about COVID, right? And it's also high-end jewelry. We're talking about, you know, $10,000 pieces and rings and things. So we built an application for them to be able to hold the iPad up and let customers look at, you know, see themselves wearing the earrings. They were the actual 3D models, photographic type quality, and they could see them dangling on their ears. And when they move their head, the earring would move with them. So we can make it very, very realistic. And we got feedback that, you know, there was jewelry that was sold from doing that. So we know it's effective, and it's helpful to do that. But augmented reality is really much more, you can see your physical environment around you, just like I mentioned on the phone, but then we're layering on a digital layer of some sort. But it's usually very limited. I might have it, you know, sitting on a table. I could put an image and I can lock that image just onto the table. Or I could look at somebody's face and I know where their eyes are and their nose and their mouth. And I could lock images just to that. That's how they get hair and, you know, silly noses and hats and things onto those filters that you have. But augmented reality is just, you know, is not really where we're going ultimately. Ultimately, we're going to something called spatial computing. So that's why I have it on the end here. And it's really a combination of both virtual reality and augmented reality. So while these glasses are only a couple $100, it's because there are a couple of things that aren't in here sensor-wise. There are no sensors that allow me to move around in my physical space and look like I'm moving around in the digital space. And so to do that, you have to have a higher-end device, around $1,000 or so. And that enters more into spatial computing, because now I can move around in my physical space. I can move in a 30 by 30 area, as an example, within that space. The other things that are on here, besides just knowing where I am in the space that I'm in, are cameras on the outside. So those cameras are helping me recognize where I am, but the cameras are getting so good now that I can turn those cameras on and now present that outside physical world to my glasses. So I could be in VR one moment, the next moment I could be looking in the physical world, but I'm doing that through cameras that are on the outside. So that's one type of spatial computing that we're seeing really that start to take off. The new Meta devices are that way, as an example. The other type of spatial computing are things like the Microsoft HoloLens. I mentioned DoD earlier. That's because there was something called IVAS, the military, and we, as taxpayers, we invested in a couple of $1 billion to Microsoft to try to take the HoloLens device like the guy was wearing, and you can see him wearing that type of device here. It just goes over your head. You can wear a hard hat with it. You can wear your glasses underneath it. And you can wear safety glasses underneath it. But it's basically presenting the data as though it looks as though you're looking out over it, and the data, much like augmented reality, is presented in that way to you. But the difference is, because I've got those cameras and all those additional sensors on the outside, I can do more than, like you saw in the video, I can do a lot more than just set something on a table. I can have it floating in space, and I can put those call-out markers like you saw within that video there, where something is very, very specific. So I can get really precise on where that call out is, and I can say that's step number 6. So there's no confusion. I don't have to go ask somebody, well, is this the bolt or nut that I'm supposed to remove, or screw or whatever? I can get very precise with that. And that's because of the technology that's available, the sensors that are available on these types of devices on the outside. So, all right, so the use cases go beyond just manufacturing. This is the other value that you'll see where prices are being driven down, because they're not just being used as one tool that's in your toolbox, where this would be in your toolbox. Lots more people are using it. We're using it, I mentioned learning and training, but remote assist is another area. Into that application that we saw with the gentleman working on the valve, there's also a remote assist feature. So I can do more by not having to have everybody geographically located where I am. So normally if there's a problem and somebody has a question, I might call them on the phone and I'm not really sure what you're working on, try to explain to me what the problem is. Or you might pull out your phone and use FaceTime and try to hold it up and see the angle. But with the platform that we have, you can actually just have the headset on as example, or hold a tablet up, the person that's on site there. And when you phone a friend, you call that remote expert, who could be anywhere in the world. When you call them and they're looking, they can just be looking on a tablet, or they could be looking on their laptop or computer. But they can see exactly what that person on site is seeing. They can see they're on step 6. So there's no more, well, I don't know what step you are on. Okay, well, I see you're on step 6. Oh, I see you're on that particular machine, and you're on step 6. Okay, here, let me help you with this. So they can see everything that person on site is seeing without being there. So you can still phone a friend and get help if you need it. So remote assist is super helpful, again, for doing more with fewer people, or at least not having to have them all in one location. They can communicate wherever they are, and that goes to the 3D collaboration and communication. That's sort of that next step of that. If you're doing design work and you want to collaborate with somebody who may not be in the office for a reason, I mean, there could be another COVID outbreak, anything could happen like that. Or we just have fewer people and somebody needed to work from home today because their kid was sick and they couldn't come in, but you could still take advantage of collaborating with them and having conversations over 3D, with 3D models and things through this type of technology. And the data visualization and digital twin. So the 3D model that you showed, and I'll show some more high fidelity models there, that valve was pretty simple, although it was complex in that you could see all the parts that were presented inside of it. But think about once you have the model of that valve, and now there are other sensors that I may put, like a temperature sensor in there, or a flow sensor that's inside the valve, a leak detection sensor on the pipe. I can now look at that valve, and rather than having to go and look up separately, well, what's the temperature, or when was the last maintenance thing done, I can just overlay that data now on top of that 3D model. And so I could look at that at home, or I could look at it there while I'm on site. When I'm trying to do the repair, I can have that data available to me right in front of me as I'm doing that. We're doing a lot of things in virtual promotions. We just finished a project at Walt Disney World, where I live, just down the street from the Mouse and Friends. And if you're familiar with Walt Disney World, if you go to the All-Star Movies or All-Star Sports Resort, we have a nice big kiosk in there. And for free, if you're staying at the resort, you can have your picture taken with Mickey, Minnie, Donald, Daisy, Pluto, and Goofy. Those are your choices. And it's presented on a big TV screen, not unlike these kind of screens here, but turned up the other way. The characters walk out. You can see them on with you. There's a camera on that kiosk. So the camera sees you, and you can see yourself on the screen, and then Mickey and Minnie come on, and you can pose with them and take pictures with them. So these are the kinds of things that people are starting to do with these augmented reality technologies. And then the last one, and this is the one I'm most passionate about because it was a reason I started the practice at AT&T for extended reality solutions, is digital therapeutics. A few years ago, I had an opportunity to go out to California and work with a very large palliative care company. They deal with patients that are near end of life. Oftentimes it's cancer, so they're on some really strong pain medications, and their families are distraught because that person who's on those medications and they're in a lot of pain, they don't want to be touched. They're very super sensitive to touch. So now you've got a family member who's soon to pass, you can't make a physical connection with them, and you just don't know what to do. And that person, that patient, near end of life is also doesn't know what to do. They're in a lot of pain, and more medication hasn't been helping them. So I had a chance to talk to the chief medical officer after he'd gone out and taken, we had bigger glasses at the time, but we're now working with these smaller glasses. They gave them to a patient. The patient was put them on. They were transported, in one example, to France and looking at the Eiffel Tower. And when they did that, their blood pressure, that was elevated, actually came down. Their sense of pain and their indication of saying, hey, it's not this, I'm not in as much pain, that also went down. But here is the big key, and this is what brought the chief medical officer to tears when he was telling me the story was, Scott, they were able to touch their mother's arm while she was in VR because she was so distracted by everything else that was going on that she didn't even know that her daughter was touching her arm. She didn't have that pain, right? So this technology is transformative, and we're going to see more and more of it happen just in the next several years as things begin to progress. Also interesting, just happened a couple of weeks ago. Gallaudet football team. It is a hearing differences team. The entire team is either has a hearing. Oh, this is not the right slide. You're getting my lorem ipsum slide, so so I'll just talk about it a little bit. What actually happened was. So the football coach has on the sidelines, because he can't communicate to the quarterback, he can't yell out things to him or communicate on a comms channel about what the next play is. It's very difficult for deaf and hard of hearing teams to be able to do that communication. So we developed a 5G helmet using 5G technology and an augmented reality heads-up display that's in the front of the helmet there so that the coach from the sideline can choose the play, and then it's immediately sent to the quarterback. And so the quarterback can see the play. And in fact, all members of the team can see the play at the same time because that's not something, again, difficult for them to be able to communicate. So it levels the playing field for those football players along the way. So in this case, and this is our new tagline, and I absolutely love it, that connecting changes everything. And I think for these, if you look this up, there are lots of articles out there on it. If you look it up, you'll hear from the football players themselves talking about how it changed everything for them in the game. And it was used in an NCAA game just a couple of weeks ago. So the helmet was approved by the NCAA for Gallaudet to use, and they were able to use it in a game as well. So I wouldn't come here telling you to do something that I wouldn't ask my company to do, and so this is something that we've also been doing internally. We take complex things like what the heck is 5G and how is it valuable to me, and we train our sales teams and we help our customers understand through more immersive storytelling in this way. So on the let's see, I guess on the left side there is an example of a manufacturing simulation using AGVs. So these automated guided vehicles that are driving around here in that space, and how 5G can help and how it differentiates over something like Wi-Fi. But I want you to think of this more, not just that this is something AT&T is doing and it's 5G, but rather this is just a 3D model. This is a digital twin. It could be a digital twin of your own factory floor. And then you can use this in lots of different ways. We're using it for sales and marketing as an example right here, right? You may also want to use yours for sales and marketing. You may want to use that to differentiate against your competition, or to be able to show people who can't come on site or refuse to come on site and they don't really understand what you're doing. You could send them something like this. They can better see what you have going on there. But then you can also take all that IoT data, like Andy had mentioned on temperature and other things like that, those OSHA regulation. You could overlay that then onto this model as well. So everyone can understand where the temperature problems are and what's working and not working. So it isn't just create a 3D model and I'm only going to use it for training. It can be used for training. It can be used for sales and marketing. It can be used in operations. So, and this is starting with the end in mind. If you're going to start someplace and you guys are visual people, having 3D models, thinking of other ways you might use the models that you have already, or other models that you want to build and put together on that. On the other side of that is just a hospital simulation, and then we have a new one that we just did on Smart Warehouse. And Smart Warehouse, again, something really important to the DoD, and how they're operationalizing things there. But we're also talking about, we've built a 3D model of a smart warehouse as well, from the inside all the way to the outside, and the semi-trucks and how trucks come in and out and move around in there too. So what's the future? I said I was going to talk about mostly science fact today, and this isn't necessarily science fiction either, although it may seem a little bit like it. This device is smaller. It doesn't have a lot of compute power in it. So if I want to render more high fidelity models, like the lighter device plus 5G plus remote rendering piece on the other side there, you can see that's a higher fidelity model. There's a lot more intricacies to that model. This device might not be able to render it. The processing power just isn't there yet. So it has to be rendered somewhere. It can be rendered in the cloud. And so that piece of rendering where that model is made is rendered in the cloud, and it's streamed to your headset that you have here. And so as I turn my head, the model turns. That takes milliseconds of time, right, to be able to move data and tell the cloud, hey, I turned my head, I look down, I look up, wherever I'm doing, and come back. But it's being done today. We have it working in a lab today. And this is another area that the DoD is, very interested in, especially for forward deployed folks to help them, so they can have a lighter headset because they can use the network and they can use the cloud to stream that data to it. But you can get things like the other lower fidelity model. That's easily done today, just like what you saw in the valve, the water valve that was on the earlier slide. And those things can all be just shown today. They're basically downloaded to the headset, and they're run on the headset itself. Okay, so how do you assess so when Monday comes and you go back to work, and Andy gave you some great things to think about when you go back to work, but also when you go back to work, thinking about how could you use this technology to differentiate your own companies. Well, there are some things that you should be thinking about, and this I've been a consultant for a number of years in IT. And so when I designed this concept, it wasn't really just around extended reality. It definitely applies to extended reality, but I think it applies to everything that you're doing. And that is, think about all the threads that go into any solution that you have. Andy would have a security thread in here as an example. But if you think about these threads, it's not unlike the thread on my sweater here. And my wife always reminds me, Scott, if you've got a thread sticking out, do not pull it because you're going to ruin the whole sweater. And that's the same way with most solutions that you have, and it's especially true on these emerging and new technology solutions like extended reality. You have to think about each of these individual pieces, and that is, think about the hardware. I mentioned there are different types of hardware. There's VR, there's AR on your phone, there's spatial computing, which can be done on a tablet, like an iPad as an example, or done on a HoloLens or other device like that. But you have to think and consider, how am I going to use the hardware? Where's the hardware going to be used? Is somebody going to need to wear safety glasses? Is it just being used? Is it something that can be small like this because I'm going to ship it to somebody and they're going to look at a marketing presentation or something like that? So think about your hardware. You've got a lot of different choices out there for that hardware. Cloud and edge solutions, there are lots of ways to deploy these kind of things. The edge rendering or the cloud rendering, like I was talking about, that you have to think about, what kind of models do I have? Does it fit on that hardware that I had? Is it something that I can host in the cloud so I don't have to host on my own site and worry about all the security headaches or any of the other headaches going with that? And I can do all those things from the cloud. Most things are available in the cloud today. That's the direction everything is moving, and has been for a number of years. The connectivity piece on that, this is going to be super critical, whether it's Wi-Fi, whether it's 5G connectivity, but these all need some sort of wireless connectivity to make them work. Because that data resides, that information often resides somewhere in the cloud, even those step-by-step work instructions that I showed, that all exists on the cloud, so I've got to connect. In the solution that I was showing, you can download those step-by-step instructions to a headset. So if you have to go somewhere, this came up with the Navy when they wanted to go down to the lower bowels of the ship, and there's no connectivity down there, so they need to be able to download content. So you can do that, but you've got to think about that. How does connectivity play into the overall solution? What's the various kinds of software that's there? And when I think about software, I also think about the digital therapeutics piece. As an example, are there videos that I need? They're like actually the video also from the valve example, right? I'm going to need some additional video, and that can be shot with a phone or however you want to shoot, or you may already have video or something like that, or PDF files. How will I ingest all that information into the system? So what do you have today? How can I transform what I have today and take advantage of it and not lose it? Move it to the cloud, have it in the software. Does the software help me with that? And then any services that you would need, because nobody expects you to be an expert at everything. And so there are opportunities for other people to help you with services and decide what's important to you to have in-house and what would be important to take outside. So I started today by talking about starting with the end in mind, but the other thing I want you to think about is not waiting till the end to start. So as you're going back to Monday, think about where you want to go, but that doesn't mean just be thinking about it. You need to put into action a plan, and you need to start working on it. This isn't something that may be affecting you today, but it's an opportunity to differentiate everything that you do today against your competition. And the federal government is already doing this, and it will come down this way. So thank you. And I'm happy to take questions, I guess I should. We probably have time, more than enough time. I'd rather. Any questions?
We've got time for questions, so anything. Yeah.
So Scott.
Yeah.
So when you toured Major Tool Guy yesterday, what stood out as probably the first opportunity for this type of technology as you saw the plant and the business there?
Yeah, so we didn't get a chance to tour the training facility. He said, I don't know, did anybody get to see the training facility? You did get to see it? What did you think of what they had there? I didn't get a chance to see it. Yeah. Like a room? Did they have a special room for their training? Oh, I see. So it wasn't necessarily real world. It was in the space, and the machines were smaller. Okay. Yeah. So training is a great opportunity because, and one of the things on connectivity to think about is, if I have a training room, and this happened at Ford as an example. If I have a training room and I've got one headset in there working, it works fine on Wi-Fi, but I didn't think about what happens when I have 2 or 3 people in that room training at the same time. So you have to think about that sort of connectivity and what that's going to do in that space. And then talking about the size and scale, I think that's probably sufficient for them. They've got the smaller scale things, but imagine if I didn't have to have anything in there. I could have a 3D model of the full scale. It can be room scale. I don't have a way to connect right now, but I was showing Gillen last night, and he has the videos he can show you as well. I scanned a 3D model of one of the race cars there, that rally race car that was up in the front. I just used my phone and scanned a 3D model of it. I could then shrink it down and set it on that table, or I made it as big as the car that was sitting right there beside it. So I could do that. And I can do that with just the phone that's in my pocket to be able to do that with. And so I can now take any sort of machine that I have, bring that into a virtual world, whether that's spatial computing or AR, or even bring it into VR, and then utilize that for training as well. I think there's some other questions back there. Anybody left? Mm-hmm.
So how cost prohibitive is that if there's so many different things? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, and that was a problem 4 or 5 years ago when it was, and I was working with a chainsaw manufacturer, and then everybody who uses that chainsaw downstream saying, well, That's great. You worked with one chainsaw manufacturer. We actually have 2 or 3 others that we use. How can we do that? And that was a problem because it was impossible to really create content. You had to go and have it custom made content. What is possible today is you can be on site right there, and you can use the physical machine that you have right there in front of you and set up those step-by-step instructions. So if there's a planned maintenance procedure or even a repair that happens because this is the other thing that happens, right? There's a repair that has to happen every 6 months or maybe every year or every 2 years. The guy who normally does it's gone. It was really pretty easy, except for now nobody knows how to do it, and it's got to be done. And you have a PDF of those steps, but I can't really see the context of that. But with a solution like this, and it's only a couple $100 per user as an idea, per month, and then you got the hardware piece of it. But you don't have to. You're creating your own content, so you don't have to hire somebody to create the content for you. Just like I mentioned on that scale of the Indy car, I was able to do that, and I use that with free software off the internet, just to take that 3D model. So if you wanted to create your own 3D model, you could put that in there, and you could add that to your your training, your work instructions that you have. But also, when you're just on location there, you can have those call-outs. You get to do that. The subject matter expert, he actually can hold an iPad up as an example, if you already are using tablets at all. Or you can have the HoloLens, if you want to go really fancy. But he can create that content just on his iPad, and that's all he needs to create the content. And he can draw those call-outs and say, that's step 1, and it goes right there. So now, even I could go out on site, and I could do that repair or that maintenance that needs to be done. So you don't have to hire somebody to do it. It doesn't have to be custom anymore. You can build it yourself. Yes, sir. Yeah. That's a good question, and you know what the definition of a good question is. No, it's one that I do know the answer to, and I'm glad you asked it. So you have to think about what Apple's doing. Apple's doing what Apple did before, and it's been successful for them, so they're going to keep doing that. They put a product. They're going to put a product in the market that's way out of most people's reach, and they're going to just focus on that. But remember, Android and Google came along and said, well, there's other markets, and there are other companies like HTC is an example of this device I'm holding, and even Meta is an example. And they're already, Meta's had spent billions of dollars on this. So no one's waiting around on Apple. They're all pressing forward. And the change of pace is hyperbolic. So, what's happening with generative AI and the AI things that are going on here, those are also impacting the hardware. You remember that? So all of those threads all have to come together, so it isn't just about hardware, and hardware is just one piece of it. But where are things going? Probably, I'm already seeing much, much smaller glasses. So Meta has a Ray-Ban headset that has a little bit more AR. It can apply, so they just look like Ray-Ban sunglasses, and they can apply just a filter to your view, so they can take all things that are green and turn them red, as an example. So now everything I'm looking through is red. But this is the kind of thing that everybody's working to do. How do we get the size of the hardware down to somebody wants to have it on and wear it, and how do we get the price point down to be able to do that? So whether it's 3 to 5 years, I'm a consultant, so I would always say, well, you're 5 years away, but but we're getting faster than that. I mean, I really am seeing things within every 6 months. I'm seeing something new, and I have a pair of glasses that are AR. They're already down to the $1,500 price, so they're not $3,500. They're already coming down to that. They can be used for safety. They've got safety glass on them already, so you can offset other things that you may be buying with them. So it's happening much faster than we all might think. Yeah, right. It wasn't all that long ago, but and I would call that Google Glass was a special thing because it was mostly just a heads-up display. It was like a little piece that sits right here in front of your eye, and it's a lot like the AT&T 5G helmet as an example. It's just a heads-up display. It isn't necessarily, but you can see through it, and that was nice because it then gave you an opportunity for other information. I mean, there are lots of sports devices out there now, goggles for swimmers as an example, that have those heads-up displays in them. And it's that type of technology that's being put into all these other devices. And that's how we got this device here that I'm holding in my hand, and even the bigger VR headsets, that came from cell phone technology. Because we made cell phone screens small enough that we could then put them right here inside. So remember when your mom said, don't sit so close to the TV because it'll hurt your eyes? Well, you're sitting right next to the TV here. But another question I often get, so I'm glad you brought that up, because what normally comes in next is, well, but no one's going to want to wear these goofy things all day long. And so I usually, a couple of things, I say, well, if you've been to the airport, and I travel a lot, and I go and I see people wearing Beats headsets, these big headsets, and I know a few years ago, I'm like, I would never wear those. Those look goofy. I would never wear those through the airport. Now, everybody's wearing them through the airport. They don't care because it provided value to them. So the look and feel, people will get over that if it's something that is valuable to them. They won't care about that. But the other thing is, eye strain and other things that people bring up. And I usually would then ask how many people like chocolate cake. Anybody in here like chocolate cake? Nobody likes chocolate cake. That table, I love that table. They love chocolate cake, right? I love chocolate cake, but I wouldn't eat it for every meal. I wouldn't just eat chocolate cake. And it's the same way with these glasses or any solution like that you have in the toolbox. It's the adage about the hammer and everything. Every problem looks like a nail. I'm not saying you should wear these all day, every day, but I am saying if something comes up and I've got to go out and do a repair and I don't have the guy who needed to do that repair there on site, but I have this, I'm 100% assured that they're going to go out there and follow those instructions, because I have traceability too. When I send somebody out to do, I know how long step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 take in each of them. And while he's doing the work, I can know that, well, he took an awfully long time on step 2. I have that traceability, and I'll be able to go back and make that change. But also, if something were to go wrong and there was a safety issue, you have that traceability to say, look, we did the repair here. They followed the steps. It was within time. It met everything that you needed. Any other questions? What? A statement?
Yeah, I'm going to come in, and full disclosure, Scott is a friend of mine, and here at AT&T, this is one of those subjects of trying to expose our members to just what's out there, and he's sharing some great input. I know I saw a very interesting use case with the HoloLens with a client. I think it was Amstead Rail out in the Missouri area. So during COVID, they couldn't send their technicians out to customers that needed support. They got, I think, about a dozen AR sets for you in case. They sent the case out. And this two-way communication that Scott was telling you about, they were able to effectively help their clients solve whatever technical problem they were dealing with through the COVID pandemic like this. So that's one of the better examples I've seen. And I think, in general, the message to us is this stuff is coming. As you said, prices down, quality's getting better. Are we going to be the innovators of it at our size companies? It's not going to be a custom tool, but are we going to be the recipients of it some way? Yeah, I think it is. And it's going to be, it's going to be the machine builders, it's going to be others that are having to figure out to leverage technology some way to help with the challenge
Oh, one more question. Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's. So I won't speak on behalf of the rest of the company and where we are on the overall 5G rollout, but I'll go back and talk about how this technology is impacted by 5G. 5G improves what you can already do today. So if you don't have 5G, you can already do everything that I showed today except for the edge rendering piece or the cloud rendering piece. So you don't necessarily need 5G for that. 5G comes in, and where the value comes in are in two places. A fixed mobile, which means I've got maybe a training facility, but it's going to be in this location today, but I want it in another location tomorrow. But it's still just a training facility, so I can do some sort of fixed mobile work. And I don't have to worry about whether the Wi-Fi can support 2 or 3 devices that need to be into that location or not, because I'll let communication carriers like AT&T manage that communication link that's available there. And then the real mobile situation, and this is, again, an area that the DoD is very interested in, is forward deployment and how can I be mobile and have soldiers moving around and wherever they are have that connection. And so for larger customers, we have a private cellular network like the DoD would want when they're forward deployed. They come in. It's a fairly large box that comes in, no problem for the military to move that around, right? Has a big antenna on it. All of a sudden, it just lights up 5G signals everywhere that's around it, and then just has backhaul, whatever the backhaul might be at that point, right? So that's how we're solving it for large businesses, and then in more rural situations, that is a problem for everybody. And it's not a problem. It's one of those things that just takes time to start rolling out and get it everywhere. I think we have a significant improvement in our network over 5G expansion, just over the last year. So we'll get there. But it won't propagate necessarily inside your building. So that goes back to those threads and those communication threads. Okay. So 5G is available outside my building, but it's not available inside my building. If you're a large manufacturer, you do something called distributed antenna system, and you come in and we can put antennas inside and we can light up the whole area. Like Major as an example, we could light that whole area up for them if that was needed. But you're not required to have 5G today. You just need to think about the connectivity that you have and how you use it. Another question? Yeah, so it is, it's a cloud-based software, and so as you might expect, it has APIs. So if you want to connect, and like I mentioned the IoT data is not from our system, it comes from an external system some way. So we have APIs that could do that, so that can show it on those models. So yeah, for sure. The other reason people want an API is, the platform we don't want that platform to necessarily be the system of record. And if it is the only way that you have, as your system of record, you can use it for that. But if you have an ERP system or other systems that you want to be your data system, you can extract that data out of our system and store it in your other cloud that you have. So, yeah. All right. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Great job. Thank you. Great job. All right. So as we wrap up here, NTMA has some amazing leadership. I was riding on the bus back last night, and a woman pulled me aside. She goes, "Hey, this has been a really, really, really good conference." I said, "Oh, thanks. I'm really glad to hear that." She said, "One of the most notable things that I noticed yesterday was that there was 1+ female at every single table." She goes, "And I looked around and I counted, and there was 1+ female at every single table." And she said, "Brandon, I've been coming to these NTMA conferences for the past 13 years. And 13 years ago, there may have been a handful of us women in the room, and now there's 1+ at every single table." And I just thought, wow, talk about an organization that has some amazing leadership. So I want to ask now, as Gillen, come on up, I want to give our closing remarks now as one of those leaders driving change for NTMA. There you are, sir.
Thank you.
It'll be on in a second.
Test. There we go. I get the distinct pleasure of just closing out this conference. I'm excited about what I've seen. And you have to think about the journey that we've been on over the last 5 years. Through 2019 was a president search. And we got Roger on board, and then 2020 we had to deal with COVID. 2021 we had to basically deal with COVID and coming out of that. But I have seen sort of a shift in momentum that I'm taking away from here, and I hope you take it away as well, to take back to your company, take back to your chapter, some of the energy that I'm seeing. So I hope that's what you'll leave with. You've got a taste of the, the technology that Scott was showing. You've heard about OSHA that, and the challenges there that Omar talked about earlier. Andy, the cybersecurity challenges that you talked. These are things that we as business owners need to be mindful of and share with others. So, I feel some energy going on, and I think it's very appropriate. Our staff, led by Roger and the rest of the team in Cleveland, have been instrumental in this. I want to take a moment now and we need to recognize those that have put this on. I'm going to first ask Kristen, where's she? She may be out doing work right. Oh, there she is. Stand up. First of all, she is the overall organizer and planner of this. We need to do that. She does not do this alone. So I know Linda Warner back here. Please stand up, Linda. Carrie's here. Jenny. Don, right? Are you? Yep, there you are. All right. Am I missing? Now, Roger, please. Yeah, sorry. You got to stand up. And, yep, there, Doug, thank you. Seeing, this is the group that executes what we on the executive committee try to put forward, help set some direction, but they're the ones that execute, deliver this type of conference. And I know my thoughts after the fabulous 80s party last night was, man, we set the bar high, and we got to work hard for Nashville, but certainly we're going to do our part. Take this momentum. Let's go out and be ready, and then come together in Nashville in a year from now, and let's work toward getting more people here so they can share with what the unique value is that NTMA offers. So with that, we will officially close Engage 2023 here in Indianapolis. Everyone have a great weekend. Be safe going home. Thank you.